morning and welcome to ELOSOFUMARTAKES. This is our 167th take, live from the Alec Bradley Lone Star Studios of Euless, Texas. I'm your host, Barry Duplessis, as always, and I'm so proud, so pleased, and so privileged to be with you all tonight. This is going to be a fantastic show, a show I've been looking forward to for quite some time. And spoiler alert, one of two things is going to happen. Either my guests and I are going to be best friends at the end of this, or we're going to be bitter rivals. But we'll find out what happens. I'm looking forward to it. But before I get to formal introductions of the guests of honor, do have to thank the people that make this show possible. And that, of course, is our sponsors. Tonight's show is sponsored by Drew Estate. Drew Estate is announcing the 25th anniversary with a celebration bash right here in my home state of Texas. This year marks the 25th anniversary of Drew Estate and the rebirth of cigars movement. To celebrate this momentous occasion, the company is inviting you, that's you, the consumers, retailers, and cigar media to its epic blowout birthday bash entitled DE25. DE25 will be held on the 25th of September at the South Fork Ranch in Parker, Texas. Guys, that's in the DFW area. That's where I am. Don't worry, it's not in the middle of nowhere. It's like literally 30 minutes from my house, and I'm literally in the middle of Dallas-Fort Worth. So don't worry, Parker, Texas, DE25. It's an event you do not want to miss. Guests who purchase tickets to attend DE25 will receive an onslaught of packages worthy of the company's single biggest milestone in event history. So stay tuned for details on that for DE25, the 25th of September. Also sponsoring tonight's show is Oveja Negra Brands, 4 unique companies who share a passion to provide innovative cigars for the next generation of cigar enthusiasts. Black label trading company Blackwork Studio, Dissident, and Emilio are combining premium tobacco with an artisanal touch. Oveja Negra, where art and tobacco collide. Join the flock and visit ovejanegracigars.com to learn more. And welcome, everyone. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome tonight's guests, always sponsored by United Cigars. Smoke one today. Start living united. Tonight's guest is Mr. Antoine Reid of Tobacco Business. Antoine, how are we doing tonight?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing absolutely fantastic. Happy Mother's Day to your mother.
She thanks you.
It was, we were talking a little bit before we kicked off things tonight. I was hoping she didn't consider me a mortal enemy because I was taking away her son on Mother's Day. So,
but no, she's like, we talked about it. So she's pretty good for tonight. So I think she forgives you for now.
That's good. That's good. Well, we're gonna make you look good tonight. Actually, you're gonna make yourself look good. I don't really need to do much here. So she'll be pretty. I think she'll be pretty happy with the result. But do you have any Mother's Day traditions? I mean, other than seeing her. I mean, you guys haven't really moved around. You grew up in the Raleigh-Durham area, and she still calls that home, right?
Right. Yeah. No. I mean, usually we take her out, somewhere for dinner, but we didn't do that this year. We just cooked. So she wanted Chinese food, so we cooked Chinese food.
That's exactly what we had for dinner. I didn't cook it though. I usually do. I am the cook of the house, but my wife wanted P.F. Chang's tonight, so I was like, that I can do. Easy enough. Easy enough. Well, so what did you guys make her?
She wanted a sesame chicken and a beef and broccoli, and she wanted lo mein, and she wanted fried rice. So I was like, okay. So so I got my little recipe book out and whipped it all up, and then we topped the night off with ice cream sundaes, which I think is what you said you and your family had as well.
Yeah.
So we had basically the same meal.
Exactly. Sounds like we were doing the exact same thing. No, it's actually, Mother's Day has kind of become, I mean, even with the COVID era that we've been living in for the past 2 years, the last 2 Mother's Days, I think it's been a really nice day both years. The weather's been nice, it's been cooperative. We had a really good family time and everything. So it's been a really nice memory for my wife, at least considering what's gone on in recent history. So,
right.
So I mean, do you have a lot of siblings? Are you an only child?
No, I have a younger brother and a younger sister.
Okay, so you're the oldest. Okay,
I'm the oldest.
Okay, and in true oldest sibling fashion, you were there first, right?
Yes, I was. 84. Yes.
Well, no, I meant you were there today at the house first.
Oh, I mean, well, my sister lives with my mother still.
Oh, okay.
So she technically was there first, but
okay. Well, that's cheating. That doesn't count.
I was about to say, but I'm still usually first in most ways.
I have an older sister, so I imagine you two have similar qualities in that regard. She's always first to everything, um, but I think I mean, and so so you guys you should do a dinner. You said, is there like a particular place in, like I was telling you before the show, I have never actually, I've been a layover in y'all's airport once, but I've never actually been to Raleigh Durham. So I'm looking for any tips I can get. I mean, is there a restaurant that she likes that's just a must go to next time I actually have to visit?
No, she's not. We never do anything really fancy. It's kind of very southern. I mean, we always end up at Chili's. It seems like, at least in the BC area, which I call the before COVID era. Everything's kind of changed now. So um, yeah, so we haven't really been out, like I said, hardly anywhere.
Man, Chili's sounds amazing. You're right. I haven't been in Chili's probably over 2 years at this point,
I
just
think that
because
was
of,
the last place I was at. When we were here, and they're like, "Oh, the state might shut down." We're like, "Oh, really?" And we're like sitting in either Chili's or Applebee's or somewhere, and we're like, "Oh, that might be interesting."
little did you know.
Exactly. Last Supper at Applebee's. What a way
Oh
to
boy.
go.
Hope you had the triple dipper platter,
I don't think
So,
we did. I think I just had a burger. I was like, "Oh, okay, whatever." We were. It was a work thing where I was like, "Oh, I guess I'll see you tomorrow, or I guess I'll talk to you tomorrow, next week, or whenever." Like I said, we didn't know what we were getting into, so that was great. Final last words.
right, exactly. Like I said bye to my coworkers on a Friday, and I haven't seen them in over a year.
Hmm.
It's crazy. It's just crazy. Just crazy to look back on it. Um, so one of the things I wanted to talk to you right off the bat, Antoine, because I was really fascinated by it in a couple of different aspects, because you have a very, like a lot of people actually in this industry, you have a really nice affinity for music. But there's one aspect of music that particularly a collection of sorts that you've kind of really delved into, which is vinyl.
Yes,
So just to put context around this, vinyl is, what, outdated in terms of technology by what, 40 years?
pretty much. It's out there. Like, I remember when it first started coming back a couple of years ago. I was just like, why would anybody ever want to buy a vinyl? Like, who would play? Who has a record player? Who would do these things? And then, like, here I am, fast forward all these years later, and I'm like, okay, so this person's coming up with an album. I guess I'll need to buy it on vinyl now, so I won't miss out like I've done on several different music artists, because it's a real pain to go back and try to find their vinyls once it goes out of print.
So, so I got to tell you that one of the most interesting things, like just pure classic example of the fact that they don't build things like they used to, right? My my mother keeps a lot of my stuff from when I was a kid and everything. And one of the things she has is I kid you not, a Mickey Mouse Clubhouse record player.
Oh my god!
I mean, this thing is like straight 80s, like written all over it. I mean, it's just obnoxious. And it's for all intents and purposes, it's a child's toy.
Hmm.
It plays real records, it plays real vinyl, but it's got the needle and everything, and 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 you can replace the needle. But it still works. I mean, it still works, and the sound coming out of the makeshift speaker in this thing is not terrible. I mean, it's not Dolby Digital or anything, but I mean, it's good.
But it's fun to listen to that little slight scratch in the background of a vinyl,
Yeah.
to watch it rotate and see that it's not even, and so it's like wobbly. I mean, it's just like I don't know. For me, it's an experience. I always like the interactions you get with vinyl. You get to hold the record. They make them, and I tell people, I was like, they don't make records. It's not just like a black record anymore. I mean, they go all out. I mean, you can find a vinyl that's blue, a vinyl that's red. Some that are translucent, some that have confetti embedded in the vinyl. I mean, it's like so many different things that they do, so you never really know. It's almost like the Forrest Gump, the box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get until you open up that vinyl. You're like, ooh, like this is kind of fun. So
So the collection has kind of taken on a life of its own, you know, like many things during what we call before, like you were talking about with the COVID era, right? But I've heard your collection's got pretty extensive, and we're not talking about just the classics, right? I mean, we're talking some modern, what we consider modern day, and I'm talking like Lady Gaga, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think I'm maybe one album away from finishing the Gaga collection. And usually I go through Urban Outfitters, so I've gotten like a good, like I said, it's Gaga, but it's like a little bit of everybody. I'm looking at it now. It's like Madonna and Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera. It's like modern. It's like Mariah Carey, Keith Urban. It's like Gwen Stefani. So you never know. Like I said, there's a little bit of everybody. Fleetwood Mac. So like it's like everybody. The whole Bon Jovi collection. I have all the Bon Jovi, because before I was into Madonna and Britney Spears and all that, I was, for whatever reason, I got really into Bon Jovi up until the Crush album. After the Crush album, they kind of went into a weird direction. So I've not really been into Bon Jovi as much after the Crush album, but I still feel like I have to buy it out of obligation of some sort.
So you've not only is this not in the collection of vinyls, not only is that interesting and eclectic in its sense in itself, but I mean, you've got a pretty vast array taste in music. I mean, I've heard you talk about Reba McEntire, Madonna.
I knew Reba was gonna come up.
So I mean,
Reba. Yeah.
So true story. I was talking to my father a few minutes before I put my son to bed, and I was talking to you right before the show, and he's like, well, who he doesn't watch the show. I mean, technology is my father's worst enemy, but he's one of the most brilliant men I've ever met, but email is like kryptonite to him. So, and he was like, oh, who you got on tonight, son? And I said, well, I was like, I've really got this fantastic media individual. He's done some sensational interviews. And I said, but one of the really things I'm going to talk to him about is his music collection. I said, Dad, you'll really appreciate this. And he's like, yeah. He's like, is he like me? And you're exactly like my father in terms of taste in music. He's all over the place, but one of his all-time favorites is Reba.
Reba is like, she is the it. She's like the queen bee. Like, you can't go wrong with a Reba. Like I used to tell people, like when I first started getting into Reba, like you listen to her lyrics and they're like soap operas. You're like, oh my gosh, like she'll tell a story. If she's told, I've watched her like behind the scenes when she's recording the album and she sits there and she tells you all about why she chose this album. And she's like, oh, I'm all into the storytelling. And for me, that's always interesting because I'm, into telling stories as well, just not in a musical sense. But, she said they have to tell a story. She's like, I don't want to just get up there and sing, like modern country songs that are not about anything about, they just are random. And she said, they have to tell a story. And you listen to her albums and they take you through the works. I mean, you can happy, scandalous, whatever. It's just crazy. Reba's like it. And she tells you, she's like, I'm not the type of person who can write the music and all that, but I know what a good story when I come across one.
I mean, there's so many classic good Reba songs, but I think like when you think about storytelling in her music, like I think the one that pops to everyone's mind, or maybe I'm just being too presumptive. The night the lights went out in Georgia.
Mm-hmm. And Fancy.
And Fancy, yeah.
And like I remember, it must have been IPCPR maybe 2018 or 2019. I remember half the team had to go off to like a Davidoff, like black tie event, and I was like, well, I'll just go over here by myself and find something to do. And I ended up at the Brooks and Dunn and Reba at the Coliseum at Caesar's Palace. And great tickets like down on the floor, and I was just like down there with everybody, and I just remember her coming out, and the whole show, like everybody was like, oh, is she gonna sing that fancy song? Is she gonna sing fancy? Is she gonna sing fancy? And she didn't, like the whole time. And then it was like at the end, and I mean, she made you cry the whole, out the whole concert. She was like, make you cry, she made you laugh. And then like the lights went out, and you're like, oh, and everybody's like, I guess that's it. She's not gonna sing fancy. And then she came out in a red dress, and everybody was like, oh my gosh. It was like, you just got goosebumps just for like that moment, like the spotlight hitting her. And like when you get to hear that song like live and see her do her little thing and rip off the dress, it's a long dress she comes out in, and she rips it off, and it's like a little short dress to go along with the song. I mean, it's like a whole to me, it's like a whole moment. Like after that, you gotta love. You gotta love Reba after that. But it's the same thing for like Dolly Parton, because I've been to a Dolly Parton. I was like the only Black person, I think, at that concert. And I remember, and people were like, I was sitting next to this, I think this brother and sister from like West Virginia, and they were like, "So what are you doing here?" And I was like, "Well, I'm here to see Dolly." And they're like, "Oh, you are?" They're like, "You like?" I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "I'm a Dolly fan." And I mean, that concert's probably like one of my favorite ever. I mean, she did everything. She played her different instruments. She sang. She made jokes about her breasts. She rapped. I mean, it was like, it's like you got Dolly. I mean, her and Reba, like I said, are like two of the best performers in my opinion.
Like, I really hope that I get to see a Reba in concert. That I have, and I've seen a lot of. I grew up. I mean, I have an eclectic variety of, in taste in music, just like you do. I'm not as big of a music consumer, and I admit this all the time. I'm not as big of a music consumer as a lot of people that I know in this industry in particular. My partner on Cigar Coop Primetime Special Edition, Coop's a big music consumer, has been since he was younger. Um, and um, and but I mean, country music is what I grew up on. So like when I heard you liked Reba, I was like, oh man, that just takes me back, because I just think about all those songs that my father and I used to listen to. And um, is it, we kind of been just mouthing for a couple minutes, but I mean, like, is it, do you tend to like, or is it just because we're the conversation I brought up Reba? Do you tend to like female artists more than male, or is it, or is that
Yeah,
as varied as well?
no, you know what? It's usually more female. I found, for whatever reasons. Like, I guess I just relate to their songs for for whatever reason a little bit more, or like their attitude. It's like the male artists kind of stay the same. I found like they're pretty static. Like you're gonna get like a George Strait character. He's the same now as he probably was, years ago when he started. Like, but
That's
like a female artist though, like I think because of the ageism and stuff like that, they constantly have to change, and if they don't change, then they're forgotten, and they're like, that's like a Madonna type. Every album is like changing. Like she ditches whatever persona that she creates for that album, and she ditches it. She completely comes up with something completely new. And even if you don't like her, you're still talking about it in some way. Whether you're saying like, "Oh, that looks stupid," or "Wow, that's really cool." And she has an attitude, and she just adapts. It's weird, and I feel like that's always a good like life lesson, because you always kind of have to you know adapt in some way to whatever situation you're in order to stay relevant, even in this industry.
So I want you to do me a favor and take me to school on this, because I'm glad you brought up Madonna. Okay, so I want you to take me to school a little bit here. Okay, I listen. What I'm about to say was gonna piss some people off, but I want to preface it by saying I recognize that Madonna is an icon. Okay, period. Like, there's no buts to this. Um, However, I was trying to think in the last 20 years, and again, this goes back to my music consumership, and that's why I want you to take me to school here, Antoine. I really can't think of, outside like the early 90s and stuff. I couldn't think of anything off the top of my head that she really did. I know there's stuff, like you said, she's turning out albums, and maybe it's just nothing's really struck a chord with me. None of it really hit me. What's kind of been in the post 80s Madonna, that where she became the icon that the world knows her as? Like, what are some of your favorites in, I guess, the last couple decades?
Oh, the modern Madonna. I think the album that I think people started to kind of really like turn off was American Life. It was during the early GW Bush years, as I can always tell you Madonna based on like what president, because she always has a different different reaction to every president and all the political situations. So that's when people, I think, started turning off from her. But that's when I first started really kind of coming on board. That was a very weird album. It was not pop, and it wasn't anything. It was kind of folksy. It was like electro folksy. So American Life was like a weird album that nobody liked at the time. But nowadays, like I was on the internet somewhere a couple of days ago, and people were like, "Oh, that American Life album like kind of held up as kind of not good, and diehard fans are like, yeah, that's what we're telling you. But there's like music Madonna, like the album music, like that was also like kind of like peak Madonna. Since then, I mean, she's she got married, and when she was with Guy Ritchie, she had like she was trying to be very buttoned up and a completely different person, which didn't really match her thing. And then she got divorced, and then she had like a very angry album and a very angry tour where she was just like very militant and in your face. And
so like Taylor Swift, but only one album as opposed to all of them.
Yeah.
That's not a knock. I like Taylor. No. She's got some catchy stuff. So,
and that was the MDNA album. So she was kind of trying to be hip and cool, like play off the club drug, the MDMA and stuff like that. People didn't really buy into that either. And then you have like the latest, and then you have Rebel Heart, and then you have like her latest era, which is like been stretched out because of COVID again, which is the Madam X era, where when she went on tour, this was pre-COVID. I mean, she was like, I'm not going to do stadium tours anymore. Or not for this album. I'm going to do intimate theater tours. And her management was like, why? Like, you could sell out a stadium. And she's like, I don't want to. I just want to do an intimate theater tour.
I'm Madonna. I can do what I want.
Yes. And it was such a strange tour. I remember going to like at the Opera House in Brooklyn to see her. And you had to give up your phone. You couldn't have your phone during the whole concert. So they gave you like a little pouch that you could lock it into. It didn't open unless you were outside of the whole place. So no phone, no recording devices. You couldn't even have your Apple Watch. You had to lock that up too. And she was late. And that's the thing about a Madonna concert. Whatever it says on the ticket does not matter. It starts when she wants to start it.
Right.
So it said 8:00, and she started it at midnight. And that was like, I mean, you have to pay the labor and all that. It's Madonna. She's going to do whatever she wants to do. And it was just like a long night, just because you were just like sitting there. You didn't have any phone to look at, as you're sitting there in your seat. You didn't have any, your watch. You were just completely disconnected, sitting there like just waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And it was just strange. But that was like, I mean, I've been to now like 2 of her concerts, and it's been the same way. She was in Charlotte. She came out again at midnight, and she wanted to come out at midnight. And then she was just like, everybody stand up, get up. You got to stand up. No sitting down at the show. And people are like, it's midnight. It's just like, doesn't matter. Stand up, stand up. So that's, you get what you get.
Yeah, and most of I guess people who followed her over the years, I mean, they're getting on up there. So I mean, midnight's well past midnight's past my bedtime most nights. So
right,
not really fair there. I'm getting yelled at in the chat here. Apparently, Confessions on a Dance Floor in 2006 was
Confessions on a Dance Floor was probably her most successful commercial. So I did forget that one, but that was like, when you listen to that album, you're just like, oh my gosh, like this is like peak Madonna. It was like 80s and pop and like the disco stuff going on, and the whole era that, she dyed her hair like red or this kind of weird blonde color. She was dancing in the studio in her leotard and the pink leotard, and that was just like the whole moment. So that is that Madonna. So she's had moments. It's just like they're kind of different moments. They're not like the 80s, where she kind of, I guess, held court. Now she's kind of having to keep up with some of the other younger acts, which, I mean, the other day, I think she did a cameo in Snoop Dogg's video, and he was, he had a lyric about passing a blunt to Madonna, and there she was, and, smoking a blunt, dancing around. So that's kind of what you get right now.
It's interesting as and I'm 37. I'm not old, but it's interesting as I do get older, how I see the people that I watched and listened to as they're getting older. And it's kind of bizarre. They're all, in my mind, they're always like the heartthrob that they were, in their mid 20s or 30s. And now they're, hitting 60 years old. It's just bizarre.
Yeah. I feel
But
like that about Britney Spears. I'm like, oh, Britney's still cool. And it's like, well, she's like 40. It's like, she's not going to dance around like she used to. And she's not going to dance or do anything, period, now because of her conservatorship. So it's just like, oh, maybe one day we'll get back to peak Britney.
I would like to hear Christina, because Christina Aguilera to me and Gwen Stefani, they both, I think, have some of the most diverse ranges in terms of singing ability. So I think those would be a fun show as well.
Christina concerts are good. I mean, I went to the Back to Basics years ago, and I know she's working on 2 albums now, so maybe we'll actually get a tour out of it. We never got a tour for like the last 2 or 3 albums from Christina Aguilera. She kept saying it's gonna come, don't worry, and then it was like it's been years. So, and the Gwen Stefani concert is like fun. I think I've been to at least one, and I remember it just being like anything you would imagine a Gwen Stefani concert being. I mean, her out in the middle of the audience singing 4 a.m, you know, and Sweet Escape and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of peak pop as well.
Awesome. We're going to get more into pop as this conversation gets deeper a little bit, but I did want to go into tonight's major point along with that. And you brought up a good point that kind of segues this perfectly. Your experience at the Dolly Parton concert. And tonight's major point is always brought to you by Barbacoa Cigars. Barbacoa is back. The voyage has relaunched. Can't wait. I personally couldn't wait for this cigar to get back to us. It's been over 3 years since the original was revamped. The blend's coming from one of the hottest new factories in the industry. Danny Vasquez promises if you like the original blend, you're absolutely going to love the relaunch. It was actually relaunched last month at Sun Cigars, but he is obviously bringing more and more retailers into it. So stay tuned for more details. Check out the Facebook page, Instagram, a couple of other socials, Barbacoa Cigars. And remember, never settle, Barbacoa Cigar Company. So Antoine, so you mentioned your experience with the Dolly Parton concert where you were in your words, the only Black person in the audience. The reason I say that segues into our next topic, interestingly enough, because you penned a piece recently within the last year that I thought was pretty insightful, because and we talked about this beforehand. The article was about Black-owned cigar companies. And I thought it was a really insightful piece because, as I mentioned before the show, I said, hey, was there a reason that Dean Parsons wasn't on the list with Epic Cigars? And I said, I know you probably got this commentary, hey, why wasn't this person on? It's always, whenever you make a list, that always happens.
Of course.
But I thought you had a really interesting take on this. You said, well, like it for as long as time could remember, it was Dean and then, X, Y, and Z after that. So, right. so I thought it was a really great article because it brought a lot of brands to, up that either A, people hadn't heard of, or B, they just hadn't gotten the notoriety yet. So I thought it was a great opportunity. But you caught some flack for this on both sides of the aisle a little bit for a number of different reasons. Talk about your experience of putting that list together, and the fallout seems dramatic, but the fallout of it.
Well, it was, it came out, I think, right around the time of the George Floyd episode incident. And, in the news, like you would turn on the news afterwards.
Now, did you pen it before, though? Did you write it before?
It came after.
Okay.
It came after George Floyd.
Okay.
So there's a lot of focus on like Black-owned businesses all of a sudden. And I was like, well, even in the cigar industry, we don't focus on that. And I was like, and then somebody tagged me in an Instagram post where they listed out all these Black-owned businesses. And I was going through the list, and there's like, most of them, I was like, I've never heard of these companies before. And I think as a media person, sometimes you think, well, I've never heard of them before, so they must not be as important. And then I thought, but maybe it is that they're important, but they just haven't gotten the same opportunity as, some of the other companies. So as I started doing my research, I was like, these are some pretty, companies that have been out there for a while, and they've, gotten some decent ratings in different places and some good press outside of the industry usually. And so I just like put together this, like what I felt like was just like it wasn't like the end all of end all list for, Black owned. It was like, I think I said it in the thing, like this is just a sampling of some of the companies, for those who are interested. And it got like 11,000 page views, which was a lot. I mean, at least for the website that I wrote it for, which was cigarsandleisure.com. And I didn't think anything of it. And just seeing like the comments that came through, because I think people don't always know, because it doesn't, like, when we send out an email blast for Cigars and Leisure or tobacco business, like it doesn't say like this is coming from Antoine Reid, but I'm the one who usually works on these emails. So I have all like the little bounce back stuff coming to me, and I was sitting there looking at the messages coming in, and it was like a little bit all over the place. I mean, I would say there was more positive than negative, but of course, when you're faced with negative stuff, you always look, and those stand out more to you than anything. So it was just like, I mean, I don't even need to get into like what the comments said and all that, but it was just like, really, like, is this good? Is this bad? It's like, what's the deal? Like, but then a couple days passed and people got over it, and I was just like, well, okay, I got other stuff to do. So I kind of just was like charged on. But from that point on, I said, obviously I think we need to do more coverage on minorities in the industry. And so I was like, for the tobacco business, especially, I said, I feel like, people read the magazine, people read the emails, they look at the website, there's no harm in us doing more coverage on, again, minority owned businesses within the industry. And that's what we've been doing more of, or I should say I've been doing, bringing kind of to the forefront in the last year or so.
Well, one of the things that I absolutely love about the cigar industry, and there's a lot that I love, and I've talked about it on the show numerous times, but is the fact that I mean, this is a minority dominated and driven industry. For the most part, I mean, it is male dominated at the top, but women play a very important role in cigar production and in ownership and along the way. I mean, they're in fact, I mentioned this on a previous show with Amanda McAuliffe, but they're segmented in all different parts of manufacturing, retail ownership. Even on the media side, there we've seen a push with a lot of different women entering in that that arena rather, and so I think it's actually pretty well representative, and I've heard you had similar feelings. I mean, there's certainly criticisms as well, but I've heard you say that you've had similar feelings as well about the industry being as diverse as it is.
Yeah, and I think the industry is a lot more diverse than people think it is. I think it's what the issue sometimes is that those minorities don't always get a voice, or they're not always featured or put in the spotlight. Because I know a lot of minorities in the media side, for example, but they're all are not on the same level as everybody else. So I don't know, some of it's just opportunity, some of it's just kind of learning how to promote yourself and how to brand yourself. It's a little bit off for various reasons, but this is a very diverse industry. So I always try to portray it as as I experience it, which is being a lot more diverse, and not just it's not just owned by a couple of people, brand owners. It's kind of a group effort a lot of the times, and a lot of these companies.
I know you didn't want to dive terribly too much into the negative, but I thought one of the interesting things, and I heard you talk about in an interview with Carl for Cigarnivore,
Mm-hmm.
how some of the commentary, unfortunately, was, I guess, under the impression that maybe you weren't Black.
Well, I don't think people know. I mean, because like there's no picture of me. Like, I know some websites, for example, like when you write a post or whatever, you put your picture down there and it says like, this is Antoine or whatever. There's none of that about, because I never think that it needs to be about me. So it always says like, this is from Tobacco Business, or this is from Cigars and Leisure. So some of these people who are writing the comments, I don't think I mean, my name was on there, but
Right.
They could have Googled it, but I don't think
it's very small. It's story
Right.
by Antoine Reid. That's it. Yeah.
Right. And it's not like it's not like the first thing you read. It's kind of like buried underneath.
Oh yeah.
For a reason, because I mean, it's not about me or whoever the writer is. It's about the story. And then you get down there and you can see who wrote it. So some of the people, I mean, my name was on it, so they could have looked it up, but they were, some of the comments were, and I told Carl this, it was all over the place, from like, this is a very diverse industry. You're being racist for just focusing on the race. And I was like, okay. And then like, there's confusing comments about like, some person, what did they say? They said something to the effect of, you know, you're being racist by focusing on the race. This person was like a criminal and they got, and basically they had it coming to them. And yet, you're trying to make this about race. And I was like, what are you trying to say? So it's like, I was like reading these comments come in, sitting here at my computer, like scrolling through these comments and like, just like what is this? Where are we going at? But there are more people, like I said, and I've reached out to a few people and said, I'm getting these comments like, what do you think? And they're like, well, you should focus on the positive rather than the negative. And it was a lot of good that came out of that article, and it still like gets a lot of traction even today. So I was just like, yeah, I guess I should. I was like, it's just hard sometimes when you like write something intending to be good, or intending it to do some good, and you're like, oh, people took it in a completely weird, negative manner. didn't see that coming. But I'm glad I didn't see it, because I would have like said, oh, maybe I shouldn't do it, do an article about this. But it's like, now I'm like, it was good to do it.
Yeah, well, the age-old saying about good intentions, but I mean, like, yeah, like, I mean, let's, I mean, you're known, and we're going to get into a few of those features that you do. You're known for these well done features of people in the industry. And this certainly wasn't one of those articles. It was just a really nice piece and a nice list of, some companies to check out.
It was like five companies to check, 5 Black-owned companies to check out. And it was just like, I think it said like, these are not all the companies, of course, in the industry, but these are just 5 you might want to check out for whatever reason. And then like a little write-up about the company. It wasn't like even more than like a paragraph on each company. It was like, here's their website if you want to, find out more. And then it was like, how dare you?
Yeah, sometimes people astound me. I really do. It's like they just look for negativity. It just blows my mind some days. It really does.
Yeah.
But we touched on women though, and like one of the 3 companies that you mentioned was Tres Lindas Cubanas,
Right.
which is owned by twin sisters.
Mm-hmm.
They're first generation Cuban Americans, Yvonne and Yvette Rodriguez, if I'm not mistaken. But we mentioned women being in the industry. In the time that you've been in it and writing features and doing design work and everything, have women kind of become more into the spotlight? Has it stayed about the same, or has it depleted and I'm just completely off?
No, I think they're finally starting to be seen as more than just sex objects. And I say that as to like, when I came into the industry in 2010, the only time you really heard about a woman or saw a woman in the industry was like in an advertisement that was, I think nowadays it'll be seen as completely sexist. They were just sex objects, and props. They would just be sitting there holding up cigars and nothing more. And then I was like, oh, I guess, no women really like to smoke cigars and stuff. And then as you get more into the industry and you go out to these events like Rocky Mountain Cigar Festival, or even IPSPR, PCA, whatever they want to call it, and TPE and stuff, you see that there's a whole bunch of women who are, business owners. They are brand owners, they are marketers, and they smoke cigars. They handle the tobacco products. They make the cigars. You realize that this is as much as of a woman's industry as it is a man's industry.
No, I completely agree. And I think that that's something that kind of gets lost, like I said, in a lot of people's perception of the industry, because the industry itself, like all the way from, to the seed to the shelf, there's a large number of women are involved in this industry, to say nothing of consumers themselves. So and I'm glad that like you said, it's changed. We're talking about 11 years ago. 11 years ago, this was the quote, you didn't use these words, I'm using the words, but this was the woman's place in the industry, right?
Right.
But that's changed considerably in a decade, and I think that's impressive. Certainly a long way to go, one could argue, and I don't necessarily disagree with that point, but I think it's great to see more women owned, and coming to the forefront with, women have always owned retail shops. They're just
Hmm.
becoming more well known. I'm really liking that more women are getting involved with media. It's not just Delicia, who does an incredible job. Um,
Exactly.
and then business owners, like, to say that, we're talking about them being black, but also, two women, sisters. I mean, this is a family-owned centric business. I mean, how much more better can you get than two sisters starting a company? I think that's pretty awesome.
Exactly. So it is getting better, I think, and I think more people are like, oh, women are involved. Like maybe we should do stories and coverage and focus on that. And it's like, yeah, you should. It's like let's tell their stories. Let's get their. I think the more stories and coverage that gets out there about women and what they're doing, the decisions that they help make, the products that they help create, then the better. Then you kind of see like, oh, it's just like any other industry. It's like they take part on all areas of it, from the retail to the manufacturing side to the consumer side.
And I totally agree. And this is kind of what I meant by when I did my introduction, and I kind of said tongue in cheek, I said, you and I are either going to be best friends at the end of this or bitter rivals. And the reason what I meant by that is to this point, this next point that I was going to make. And one of the reasons I was excited to have you on tonight, Antoine, and I wanted my audience to be aware of this. I mean, outside of some DMs, you and I have never conversed or met.
Right.
But one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on the show, and I find you absolutely interesting, is you and I have a like mind in a lot of ways. Because look, I nerd out on wrapper binder filler like all day, every day, and I say that all the time. But that's not the show. My show, I want to talk to people about their story and even the story behind their story that made their story relevant. And that's kind of the focus of this show. And that's what I love about your work. You do the same thing.
I try to. I always try to get that, like you said, the story, because I feel like anybody can type in wrapper binder filler. You can go to any retail's website and find out that information about a cigar. But do you really buy a cigar just based on that information, or do you buy it based on like sometimes like the personality or the people behind that cigar? And to me, if I know a person a little bit more, their story or like the struggle that they had to bring this cigar to market, or the significance of the cigar to them, like beyond just like I said, the material that goes into it, then I feel like more connected to that person and that product, and I want to give them my business, and I want to give them the time and everything that goes into just like trying that brand. And that's always been my contribution to the industry. I feel is like to go beyond the wrapper binder filler, which is what I started out writing about. And then I was like, this is so boring. Like, how can people like, I was like, how do people find this interesting? And then I was like, I just got to do something else. So it was always about finding the better story outside of just, the basics.
Well, I think there's a place for that. And, please don't mistake me, Antoine. I'm not trying to, this may sound derogatory and I'm not trying to be, but like, that's not your bag. Like,
No,
you
it's
know,
not.
and like, but you, I mean, I was trying to think of a way to describe you earlier this week when I was thinking about tonight's show, and I was thinking about like, well, you're a storyteller first and a cigar smoker, probably not even second. You're probably a cigar smoker 10, right? Like in terms
Yeah.
of, um, but what I really appreciate about your work is, again, like Cigar Aficionado, let's take them for example. They do features on celebrities who happen to smoke cigars, and even then, not necessarily at all, right? But it's an
Right.
entertainment and a lifestyle magazine, and they do great features, great articles and pieces on these celebrities. Well, you do it on the people that we want to know about, the cigar nerd audience,
Right.
and that's what I really appreciated about it, is it's a deeper dive into the lives and the people that I want to know about. Like I want to know why, why Matt Booth is Matt Booth. I mean, that's a saga in itself, but
Or like you might want to know, for example, like Ernesto Perez Carrillo, Like,
Loved your deep cuts with him, by the way. That was great.
right. Oh, thank you. Like here's this guy who's won all these like #1 cigars, but like, do you really know his story? Like, you have to kind of go into a deep dive on the internet just to get kind of like the basics. And even then, you don't get his personality. So that's always like what I try to do. I always feel like there's a part of me that says people already know the story, they know these people, but then I say though, there's probably people who don't really know the story, like who never go that deep. And some of these people have never been asked these questions in a long time, maybe if ever. And I was speaking to Ernesto. You saw the deep cuts, but I've done like a follow up since then. And I was just like, what was your first time smoking a cigar like? And that's something that I don't think you can't really do a deep dive on the internet and find. And this is like a weird, because I'm curious, like, how did you enter? Was it like love at first sight, or was it not love at first sight? And usually for a lot of these people I found was like the first time was like not a great experience. And then they kind of had to like, they got out of it, and then they kind of came back in at a different angle and then completely fell in love with it. And like, I won't tell you the story that he told me about what it is, but his was not like, you think of the Ernesto now, it was not like that experience, that first experience, which was like really funny. And that will be a part of a story that's coming up. But yeah, I always feel like there's a lot more to people's stories than what we know and than what we're told. But I wish there was more of that on the front cover of magazines. It's always weird to me that there's so many magazines that are just like celebrity fronted, and you're like, how many stories do I need on The Rock? Or how many James Bond stories do we really need anymore about, Sean Connery, rest his soul, and his love of cigars or whatever. Like, there's some celebrities in the industry that never get a moment on the cover. They get a #1 cigar, but you don't know them still. You don't know what was their inspiration behind this, cigar. Did they just like make the cigar thinking it was going to be #1? What was the process? So that's always my angle. I'm like, okay, I think there are tons of people who have the celebrity angle completely covered. We don't need to go out and get, the celebrity for our cover. We can pull from the industry and find, plenty of people who are cover worthy or have like very interesting stories, and put them front and center.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I love about this. That it's a constant storytelling experience. This entire industry always is. It's
Mm-hmm.
terrific. I love it. The we're going to get into a couple of the pieces that you have done recently here in a few moments, but to kind of take it back to your story a little bit. I wanted to take a little gander back in how you kind of got into this. And your background is graphic design, and you've always had an affinity for art as well
Mm-hmm.
as music. We talked about your love of music earlier, but you know so you went to college, you went to University of Miami for a year, but then you transferred back home, so to speak, at UNC Chapel Hill.
Right.
Um, and I, I heard a story recently about your first meeting with your new guidance counselor at Chapel Hill,
Mm-hmm.
and because you were a sophomore and you still hadn't declared a major, and they asked you to declare a major, and you're like, well, I love art. And I heard this quote, and so if I'm misrepresenting you, please correct me. But you're like, I love art, but I want to make money.
Exactly. Yeah. I was like, because for me, I don't know if a lot of people know, but like I went to an art magnet school. So magnet school completely focusing on the arts. And I went there from 1995 until, so from 6th grade up until 12th grade, nothing but art. Art. So when I got out of that, I was like, I don't want to do something completely different. I want to do psychology. I went to UM thinking that I was going to be the psychology major. Then I found out how much science and math was involved in that. And I was like, there's no way I'm going to do that. I just can't do it. And so when I transferred to UNC Chapel Hill, I was sitting there with the advisor, and she said, you have to declare a major. And I was like, okay. And as you said, she said, what do you want to do? And I was like, well, I don't know yet. And she was like, well, what do you like? And I was like, well, I like art, but I obviously want to make money when I get out of here. I don't want to like art degree. What can I do with that? You know, I had talked to my mom about being a teacher, and she had told me no, because she was a teacher, and she was like, "You just won't. No, don't do teaching." So I was like, "Oh," I was like, "Well, what else is there to do?" And so the advisor, she was like, "Well, you know, why don't you do graphic design?" And I was like, I had never heard of graphic design. I was like, "What is it?" She kind of told me a gist, like it's, you know, it's like computer art, and you know, you work with magazines and newspapers, and you can create brochures and stuff like that. And I was like, I guess so. I was like, that sounds like decent. I guess I could do that. And she was like, you know, there's a graphic design track at the art school, and there's a graphic design track at the journalism school, and maybe you should go to the journalism school. She's like, it's a little bit harder. It's a process. You just don't go. You know, you just don't. You can get in, but you have to like pass all these tests to get your degree. And I was like, whatever, let's just do that. And I was like, it sounds good. It sounds good enough. And that's what I did. And so like the graphic design part of the program was really only a couple courses. Like it was like how to do a newspaper design in Illustrator. And then once you get out of school, you realize you never use Illustrator to do a newspaper design. You use InDesign. So it was like half the stuff I learned, you know, in there was like not useful course wise, but the journalism part of it, like reporting and media law and like all these other courses, just like kind of built up that writing part that I never thought I would ever use. And then when I got out of college, I basically used the graphic design part that I learned in it. And I had like a very great internship, and it was this company that doesn't exist anymore, but so I went to school in the age of Napster, and there was this company that was trying to be like, it was trying to be like a legit Napster. That was their whole business model. They were going to be a legit Napster. They're going to be like file sharing and stuff like that. And they were based up in Herndon, Virginia. So for a whole month, I went to work in their office, and it was just like, I mean, the art director there, he never smiled, never said good job or anything like that. Really, he was like, he'll just walk in, he would just kind of look at you and just like have to like this discuss, you know, like interns or whatever. And he would make us like learn like strict things that we would never think we would ever like really apply elsewhere. Like he was like, oh, you need to cut out these name tags. And we're like, okay. He was like, but you can't use scissors. You have to use an X-Acto knife. And, you know, we're like, what? And then it's like we were sitting there like, you know, with a like a little ruler and an X-Acto knife and try to cut out all these like name tags. And he would hold them up to the light, and he would say, oh, it's jagged, print it out and start over again. That was like the internship. And it was like the whole, like basically a whole summer of that. So it made me very nitpicky about things, because I was like, I always have like PSD, you know, kind of, or PTSD, kind of worried about like, oh my gosh, like flashbacks of this internship. So I became like a decent graphic designer. And it wasn't until, like I said, we kind of started working on Cigars and Leisure, like this idea for it. Somebody else at the company was, you know, kind of brought this idea and said, you know, can we create our own magazine? And I was like, what do you mean, like create our own magazine? He was like, well, can we just create it? And I was like, you mean like everything, like a full blown magazine? And he's like, yeah. I was like, nobody at this company is gonna stop to take time out, you know, from the other magazines that we were doing to create our own magazine. I was like, so if you want to create it, we have to create all the different parts of it ourselves. Like we have to write it ourselves. We have to like do the design ourselves, do a mock-up, you know, get the advertisers to buy into it before we even like present it to the company. And that's what we did. We started in October of, I think maybe 2014 or so. And it wasn't until spring, so like maybe March, April that 2015 that we presented it to the company. And by that time we had a mock-up, we had presented it to different advertisers. So we gotten like, you know, a little bit of money behind it. So it was like a no-brainer for the company. It was just like, yeah, you're just handing us money, I guess let's do it, you know. and that's how I got into it. And they were flipping through it, and they were like, and I think they thought it was going to be like dummy copy, you know, like the Latin copy that just says nothing, that just fill the pages. And they were like flipping through it, and they go, oh, this looks like a natural story. Like who wrote it? And I was like, well, I wrote it. And they were like, oh, you wrote it. And it was like, because I was at the time, I was just like the graphic designer. I wasn't like known as the writer or editor Reid, as people might know me from Instagram. So it was like this whole process, and that's how this whole, I guess, my current adventures in cigar media kind of began, really, because it was like, oh, I could do other stuff. I can write, and they were like, oh, we never knew you wanted to be a writer. I was like, well, I never really knew I wanted to be a writer either. I was like, I guess I kind of do. I kind of enjoy it, because graphic design is very solitary, and I like that, when you write a story, you have to kind of interact with somebody else or bring that story to life. So that was a long way to answer that question, but that's kind of been my arc in getting from where I was in college to where I am today.
Well, not to go back too far though, Antoine, you had alluded to something, before we started talking tonight. And so I wanted to see if you could talk to us about the story though, but you said your first foray into journalism was at UNC, where you were having to take these courses. And, apparently, you ruffled some feathers, it sounds like, with your first foray into journalism. Or am I reading too much into your comments earlier?
No, I think you were right. Like I think it was when I was taking this media law course, and it was taught by this very tough woman. She was like a very short woman, elderly, but she was so tough. Like, she made us cry, like, in class. Like, she would just crack the whip on us. And she was all about media law. And she said, if ever you get in trouble for something that you write, just tell them, just ask the question, what about the First Amendment? And so, and she says that the first day of class, and like several other times. I mean, you never think about it. So at the time I was, UNC had this thing where they were going to have substance-free housing, which meant if you really didn't want to be around people who drank and stuff like that, then you could like sign up to be in this kind of substance-free, alcohol-free, like smoke-free, whatever housing. And at the time, that was very appealing to me, because I was very quiet. I didn't want the whole party lifestyle thing. I was like, just leave me alone in my room, to watch Golden Girls, and I was going to be fine. So I signed up for it, and I was like, I'm all for it. And, I guess at the time I thought maybe there would be like a flood of people wanting to like do this. And there were, because you got to be in like the nicer housing, like right near campus. So it was like a couple-minute walk to everything on campus. And I get there, and my roommate, I get the one roommate who's like not substance free. And I'm like, well, how did this happen? And like, he was, we had like the little mini college fridge that you're used to that doesn't fit anything more than like 5 drinks, and a little bit of, maybe 1.5 shelves to put food in. He just like took it over, put beer in it and stuff like that. And I was like, well, what's going on here? And I think he, like I said, I had classes during the day, so he would sleep during the day, and then he would have classes at night and then want to sleep during the day. So it was like this weird setup, and it was just so frustrating. And I remember going to the RA and like, look, this guy is like not substance free, and this is substance free housing. I don't want to complain, but that's what we signed up for. And he was like, oh no, the guy is like, I know the guy, he's a friend of mine. He's like the best guy ever. You'll be fine. And I was like, no, you don't understand. So I was like, you don't understand. I was like, this is not what we signed up for. So my first foray into journalism was to write this, nobody would listen to me. I would go to everybody and say, what's going on? Like I said, nobody's listening to me. This guy's horrible. Like, he tries to keep me up at night, because it was just like weird. And so I started writing this blog. That's like when, I think it was like blogosphere back then. And I started every night. I was just sitting there like, it'll be like Carrie from Sex and the City, except I'll be writing about my roommate. And I just kept this blog every single day. And I'll just like write what horrible things I felt like he was doing. And like, I just kept them running along. So when the RA didn't help me, I added him to the blog too. So I would like write, I went to the RA today, complaining he didn't do anything, whatever. So one day I walk in and they say, we need to see you. And I was like, oh, okay. And I come in for class. So I was like, okay. And I sit down, and they plot this big stack of paper in front of me, and they're like, this is your blog, and you've written about, your roommate, and you made him very uncomfortable. And I'm like, wait, I made this guy uncomfortable? Like the guy, the non-substance free guy in substance free housing? like uncomfortable? And they're like, yes, you made him very uncomfortable and you made him cry. I was like, the guy doesn't cry. I was like, I've seen him. I was like, he's never cried once. I was like, I've cried more than this guy has cried. And so they start going on this thing about like you violated the housing code.
You've made him cry. Oh my gosh, how old are we, man?
Yeah, like you've made this guy cry, and this is like sophomore. This is like junior year. So it's like we're almost done with college. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like this guy? And then like I was like, what do I do? So I just remember the class thing. So they kept kicking me up a level. So they're like, you got to go talk to this person because you violated the housing thing. You might not, you might have to get out of this housing thing. And I was like, well, can I just like get a better roommate or something? Like switch in with somebody who like, does, drinks, and then they'll be fine. And I was like, give me somebody who doesn't. Didn't want to do it. So they sit me in front of like the housing manager, this kind of portly big woman who's going to be imposing and say, oh, you violated the housing code. What do you have to say for yourself? And I was like, well, what about my First Right Amendment? Don't I have a right to say what I want to say? You all are trying to take away that right. So they exiled me from the good part of campus to the farthest reaches, like like it would take you 20 or 30 minutes to walk from that part of campus to where we were. And that was, and they put me in a room by myself, which was fine. That was like awesome. Because I was like, this is like the life. And I was like, am I going to get a roommate? Is it going to be even worse? Because I had horrible roommates throughout college. Like there's only like one roommate that was decent. And so this wasn't anything new to me. So they sent me in this room and I was like, well, how's this room empty? And it's like, oh, the two people who lived here before got into a fight and one of them got thrown through the window or something like that. And so the room,
oh my gosh.
The room is free now and you're just going to be here by yourself for a while. And I was like, that's fine. And that was, after that, I just started living off campus. But that was my first foray into like, I guess doing expose journalism where you just like, just blast everybody. And I came up with code names for them anyway. So it
was anonymous? You didn't even name names?
I didn't even put their names. I just like came up with like code names for it. So it's like my roommate, I would call him Dorcas. And I was like, Dorcas this today did blah, 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 blah. And then the RA, I mean, there's plenty of RAs on campus. So it's like, choose which one you think it's about. And like, nobody read this blog. I mean, even back then I was like looking at the analytics and I was like, oh, nobody's looking at it. And so it was weird, but that was always like my first, crack of the whip into journalism and First Amendment rights and stuff like that. So I was like, wow. So she was right. Every time you get in trouble, just say, what about my First Amendment right? And they just exile you to a different part of campus or just try to get rid of you.
Unbelievable. That's crazy. I have some similar roommate tales. Nothing that I should have kept a blog, I guess, in some cases, but hindsight 2020.
Like one of my roommates and when I was at, I won't say what school, but I was during my years in college, I had one roommate who never had dealt with like a non-white person before. Like he was just fascinated that there were like Black people and Hispanics and Latinos. And it was just like mind blowing. Like at first you thought he was joking. You're like, no, like this can't be true. Cause I mean, I was from the South, so it's like diversity is like everywhere. But this guy was like never encountered, never thought of anything. So he was always strange. So he would sit there and like look, he was just like turn around in his chair. It's like, how would I say this in Ebonics so I can communicate to your people? And I was like, dude, I wouldn't even entertain it after a while. I would just be like, I'm not going to put up with it. I'm just going to sit here and do my work and just ignore it. And it was just like, so again, I was never like having bad roommates just seemed like the thing. Like I was like so excited to get a roommate because I always thought it was going to be like TV. Because I think back then, it was like 2002. So what was on TV, like Dawson's Creek and Felicity and all this stuff. And I was like, wow, they have so much fun with their roommates. I can't wait to get out and like 90210 and stuff like that. I was like, wow, I'm going to get out here and like and Melrose Place and all that stuff. So I was like, all these shows had just gotten me thinking like roommates were going to be awesome and like we're going to have all this fun. And that was definitely not what I got. So that's why to this day I love like just living by myself rather than dealing with people.
Just not to go back too far in the conversation, but you mentioned Golden Girls, being a fan of that show, and I watched a lot of Golden Girls too on syndication, and I thought I thought they were hilarious. Speaking of roommates, like I just thought they
Hmm.
were hilarious, and it was just a great show overall, and tackled a really go like looking back in retrospect, tackled a lot of interesting issues and discussion points, and did it with such humor, and did it with humor that was even at the time was dated. I mean, these were elderly women, and to connect with someone like me who is 40 years their junior, and the same thing with your case. I was recently listening to an interview of Anthony Mackie of Marvel Universe.
Uh-huh.
Sure you're familiar. He's like apparently obsessed with Golden Girls. Obsessed, like, and it was an interview. It was done by Justin Long. I don't know if you're familiar with the actor Justin Long.
I am.
And it's on his podcast called Life is Short, and he had Anthony Mackie as a guest, and I mean, they were just talking for like minutes on end about Golden Girls and how he just thought it was like the best thing ever. He's like, oh yeah, I watch it every day, and I was like, every day. I was like, I mean, I thought I was a pretty big fan of it, but what was it about the show that connected with you? Like, what I mean, which one was yours? Which one were you, a Sophia guy, or
I think the older you get, like you align yourself with like a different Golden Girl. Like you always want to be like hip and cool, like Blanche. But
right?
then, like the older you get, you realize that you're probably more of a Dorothy, like the sarcastic, not a lot going on in life sometimes,
She was
but
savage, man. She
but
was.
yeah, but you can like that put down, and sometimes I get like that at work. Like I'll just say something to somebody and like a Dorothy tone, like it doesn't sound like it's a joke, but it's like it's kind of like you said, it's not a put down, but it's also not like a uplifting comment either. It's just like that sarcasm. Um, and then you always wanted to be kind of naive like Rose and stuff like that. So to me it depends on like what age. I guess every age I feel like a different one. Right now I'm definitely in a Dorothy a Dorothy stage of life, I think. um
To be a fly on the wall for some of those jokes you probably cracked Stephen Ross's way, I would just love to hear. So but
yeah.
no, I think yeah, when I was younger, I don't know, I always felt sorry for for Rose. She was kind of like someone I empathized with, and she's she's an empathetical character. So, but I mean, I think Sophia is the one that I've just come to love throughout life. But I totally get what you're saying though, as you kind of and it's interesting, like as you watch it, as you get older, you catch new things, you kind of relate to different characters in a different way, and it's interesting, those sitcoms that we you know were a part of as kids, and then as adults, like what they kind of look back and stuff. So fun times for sure. So you go from writing this controversial blog to graduating, of course,
All
a
right.
couple years later. And as you told your guidance counselor, you're looking to make money, so you take a job. And for 4 or 5 years after UNC, you go to work for a gardening magazine.
Yes, which was terribly boring. It's as boring as it sounds. It was definitely a learning experience. When you get out of college and you go from making absolutely nothing to being offered something, you think it's a lot, and then you realize later on, you're like, oh, I'm at the poverty line. I'm below the poverty line, and and you're told, oh, this is a lot. This is all we have to give, and yet you're looking at like the head of the company. You're like, okay, you have a nice house. The ad person has a nice house. I'm putting together the magazine. I don't, I'm living in like a little apartment, scraping by. And I remember in the middle of me being there, like I had a gallbladder that needed to come out, and, getting a bill, and like, okay. And I told the guy, I was like, look, either I get more money here or I just go find something else to do. I said, because I got to pay for this gallbladder now. And this job and what I'm making here is just not aligning. Like it's not like I can't afford to work at this job anymore. I need something more. He was like, oh well, let me help you out somehow, or or we'll find a way. And it was just like, it never really happened. But, I rode that job out until like the very end. Like literally, like the company got bought by somebody and they let me go. And I was just like, praise God. I was like, I was like so happy. I was like, when can you come get this stuff? We were working remotely. I was just like, please come get this stuff. And the guy was like, I'll be there, Saturday. I was like, it will be out on the yard for you to come get. Thank you. Goodbye. I don't want to see you. Don't come into my house. Don't come into my apartment. Don't want to see you. So it was a complete learning experience, that first job.
I was trying to find it. It's not in circulation anymore, is it?
It might be, but it's gotten absorbed, like I said, by a bigger kind of company. The guy at the time wanted to own all of the gardening magazines in the United States. A weird goal, but it was his it was his goal.
You do, you boo boo.
Right. And so he bought out anytime one was like slightly for sale, he bought it out, and he tried to make some of it, unique to the state, and then some of it was like cookie cutter kind of stuff, and it was just whatever. So yeah.
So that's the time you got into the tobacco industry, okay. I mean, your experience to the tobacco industry at that point, I don't think I'm misrepresenting you, was nil, right?
Right.
So what was that interview like, that job interview?
That job interview was like, I was at the end of my rope mentally. I was just like drained. And I remember I had like an interview at this company that I was working for at the time, which doesn't even exist anymore, and like a college like the next day. So I was like, look, I got 2 interviews lined up this week. I don't care how they go. Like, let's just go. Let's just do it. So I remember like walking into the interview, and I was just like, laying there, like sitting there, like all like relaxed and stuff. Cause I was like, I have been through enough interviews at this point. I was like, whatever, let's just get this going. Come on, I got stuff to do today. And they were like asking questions like, well, what happens if you don't have a picture and we need a picture for the magazine? I was like, I'll just make one if I find it. Like, wow, it was just like, do you care that it's like tobacco products? I was like, look, as long as I don't have to smoke it, if I don't want to, I don't care what it is. Like, I'll do whatever. I was like, literally. And they're like, wow, like this guy is like pretty cool. I was like, and it was like, and it was just like questions like that. And it was just like, whatever. And I remember leaving, and by the time I got home, they're like already like offering me a job. And it was like way more than I was making at, my first job. It still wasn't a lot, but it was still like way more. And I was like, yay, progress, like, fine. And I was like, and it was, like I said, I was just like came in there. I didn't know anything about the industry. Like you said, I didn't smoke cigars, don't smoke cigarettes, still don't smoke cigarettes, nothing. So it was just like a job. So I would just like get the story. We were still using like actual folders at the time. They were delivered to, the editor would come drop off the folder on the shelf. You go pick it up and look through it, and all this material will be there. You just slap the story together, and that's what I did. I mean, that was my introduction into the industry, just sitting there like, oh, okay, Davidoff, Winston Churchill, like they want this picture here. And that's what I did for a while. And then every now and then, you have to like actually read the stories to kind of get an idea of, what pictures are placed here and there. But that was really my introduction into the industry, getting involved.
So speaking of your arc, so you go from that, for all intents and purposes, little interest to be a part of it other than your job, to now where, you enjoy cigars frequently, might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but on a regular basis.
Yes, I'm not an everyday, wake up in the morning like alarm clock goes off and a cigar falls into the hand type person. You can probably tell that from my Instagram. It's like it might be like a week, I might have a cigar, or it might be like once or twice. It might not be any, in a week, but it's I'm always about like, I think I focus more on the people part than I do like the product part. Cause I'm like, I can't tell you, I'm not a cigar reviewer. Like I can't tell you all the different tasting notes and stuff like that. And you probably don't want me to tell you, cause I'll just be like, it's like cedar and,
it's good.
and wood. Right. it's good, or it has a good draw, or it doesn't have a good draw, or I have to light it, relight it 2 or 3 times. Like that's my kind of review. So I'm not that type of person. I feel like there's a billion other people in this industry who are good at that. And where I'm good at though is like you said, maybe telling the actual story. So I've always focused and stay in my lane of that. Like we don't do reviews in tobacco business. We're starting to do reviews for cigars and leisure, but I'm not the one reviewing it. I send it out into the world of people I know who actually smoke cigars a lot more than I do, who could be really nitpicky or are better at that than I am, and they review it, and I just sit there and look at their notes and say, well, that's their experience. That's what we're gonna print.
So two questions I want to kind of dive into here. One I think is an appropriate observation because, maybe not the audience of my show, and maybe not even the audience of Deep Cuts, or even your audience that read your articles, but you Antoine Reid is a perfect representation of the target, because most cigar smokers, the majority of cigar smokers smoke like you, the once or twice a month, 3 or 4 times a month kind of thing. And that's what makes the industry go, is that individual.
Right.
It's not the guy, like it's not me who has, I have 1 or 2 cigars a day. When I have a leisurely day, and that's when I have like 4 or 5. But I'm a daily smoker. But I'm in, we have this kind of narrow purview in our arena of media because of where we focus on. But you're an absolute representation of the market.
Right. I always tell people, like, when I approach my stories, that's why I don't focus on wrapper, binder, filler, because to me, like if I picked up a magazine and that was all that was there, it wouldn't do anything for me. I'll be like, I don't know anything about the company, the people behind it, like where it's made or whatever. So I always write for, like you said, somebody who just stumbles upon the magazine and they think, oh, tobacco, like I would never be, a cigar smoker. And I want them to pick up the magazine or whatever story, or they stumble on the website and read it and go, oh wow, wait, this is like entrepreneurship. This is business. This is kind of a cool story. This is, Matt Booth. This is a guy who makes jewelry or whatever. Or this is, Nestor Placencia, this guy whose family has grown tobacco forever, and he got into it, through this angle and has kept the business going, all these years. So I always write for the people who maybe aren't, like you said, everyday smokers or whatever, to try to get them to understand more of like what's happening in the industry and the people who are taking part in it. Because I think that's going to always kind of move the needle a little bit away from the anti-tobacco people who think anybody who's smoking a cigar or really who, because I focus on mostly on cigar most out of any product category, that anybody who's smoking a cigar is like trying to get a kid to smoke a cigar or something crazy like that, and that's not at all the case. It's about entrepreneurship. It's about family businesses. It's about people. It's not even about corporations. It's like these businesses started for nothing really, and some of them make lots of money, some of them don't. Some of them just do it because it's a passion.
See, that's always been one of my observations. If the FDA, for example, sat down and had a conversation with Ernesto Perez Carrillo,
Right.
I mean, they would see that the furthest thing from his mind is getting his finished product into a miner's hand. That's not
Exactly.
That's not the motivation at all. And someone like Matt Booth, again, who we're going to talk about a little bit more in a second, I mean, in a lot of ways, he's representative of someone like you, and that's probably why you have a friendship with him too, because while he probably, from my knowledge of him, he enjoys cigars a little bit more frequently than you do, but it's more of a community thing with him. He's building he's a brand builder, and he's done an incredible job with it. So to go back to your colleagues though, tobacco business, they've seen this arc of you from coming in and knowing nothing, having no interest, to now being, a recreational smoker who indulges in our passion and has become a small passion of your own. I mean, has anyone ever talked to you about that? Like, do they think that's really cool, or is it just like that it was an inevitable, or like has anyone ever acknowledged the your growth, I guess?
They have acknowledged the growth. I think they've acknowledged, because I was always a behind the scenes kind of person. So up until a couple of years ago, when somebody in the industry said, "Oh, you have this important role, but you are a behind the scenes person, and that doesn't work. Like, people need to know who you are." And I was like, "No, they don't need to know who I am. I mean, it's just about the work." They're like, "No, they need to know like who you are. Like, what are your interests? What do what do you look like? What do you do? That's your story." And that's when I started going. I was like, I guess I need to start an Instagram account and put myself out there a little bit more. But they've acknowledged, like other people I work with, acknowledged that arc, especially after last year, during COVID, and you're sitting around going, there's no events to go to, there's no trade shows to go to, there's nothing. Like, what do I do? Do you just like sit around and wait until things get better, or do you get out there a little bit more and doing these videos and Instagram lives with different people, periodically? um they saw that as a big growth, because they know how usually I'm like, I'm fine with being a behind the scenes person to a degree, but then I realized, I got to get it out there. I got to get that my story out there too, and get help people get to know me so that they can trust me, so that they know that, if I tell you I want to write a story about you, I'm not going to, do some kind of hack job of like out to get you. And I tell people, I was like, I don't do gotcha journalism. That's not my thing. It's usually pretty, what you tell me is what usually ends up in the story. I take, I do the interview with the person, I transcribe it. So I go through it, like I live through it again. And then I sit there and pick out pieces of it to make it into a story. So um, it's a
So,
process.
like I said, we're going to talk about some of the subjects that you've had as part of your features in a moment, and I keep teasing that up here, but again, this purpose of today's conversation was to learn as much about you as possible, just because I found your story very fascinating. Um, but I mean, you've talked to a number of individuals who are, have, are very sage-like, have got words of wisdom that I'm sure they've shared with you. Some, we've interviewed some of the same people, and they've shared some of the same or similar stories, similar advice. Have you ever taken any of your interviewees' advice? And if you have, can you think of anyone that like really stood out to you? Like, wow, I really took this with me, and I use it in my day to day, or in my in my life.
Well, I mean, I think I learned something from every. I know it sounds kind of cheesy, whatever, but I really learned something from every interview that I do. Like, usually, I get to right now, for the most part, choose which interviews I want to do or what stories I want to pursue. So, it's people like you said that I feel like they have a story to tell or something to teach, and I always ask them certain questions like, what's the best piece of business advice that you've received that made an impact on your life? Or what does success mean to you? I always have like, we always have like these interviews where it's very structured, very kind of predictable questions, and then my last 5 or 6 questions are always kind of random, like I say, like Oprah questions, like these broad questions that always, for some reason, I think that they're so simple that the person can be like, oh, I got to answer this question, and it's usually like that's what stumps them for some reason. Like I'll ask them, like, if you can go back and change one thing that you've done in your with your business, or your with your business in particular, for tobacco business, like, what would you change, and why? And they're like, oh man, I don't know. And I'm like what is it? And I keep trying to push them to answer that question. In terms of like, has there been one that where I've learned something a lot? And I would say, as a writer, it'll probably be, um, to make sure that you know people want to. It's more worthwhile to have somebody tell you something rather than you say it. Like, for example, when I was doing the Herclots interview, like I did a version of the story and I was like, yeah, this is like, I'm happy with the story. I sent it to him and he was like, where are all the quotes from me in the story? And I was like, oh, because I had taken his quotes and some of it, and instead of just working the whole quote in there, I would just like paraphrase it or something like that.
Uh-huh.
So that importance of sometimes finding a way to get as much of their voice in there as possible, and that changes every story because you can paraphrase anything, and that's going to sound like you, and it's going to sound very straightforward and sometimes maybe boring. But if you get their voice, then it's them saying it word for word. So like in the Herclot story, I think towards the end, like he's talking about success and that it's not just about the money, and it's about the process and what you learn from it. And he made it sound a lot more sophisticated than what I can put in and paraphrase it right now to you. But learning how to like listen to them, and then like I said, spit out, basically take what they say and work in exactly what they said so that you see this is what the guy, or the woman said. Like, it's not what I'm paraphrasing or my interpretation of it. Like, this is it.
I think one of the things we're going to talk about Michael a little bit more in depth here in a second, but I think one of the things about Michael that I have always really appreciated, and he's brought this up several times, and you bring it up in your story. Well, actually, I'll just call it audible. We'll talk a little bit about it. Is the why. He is to continually ask why. And that's a big thing and that's how he attributes a lot of success to that. His personal success to always wanting to know more, getting deeper, and finding out like we do,
right?
The story behind the story. Well, why is this happening? Well, why did that happen to make this happen? And and he's learned a lot because of it. And I thought that was, that's a very simple. I mean, it's an oversimplified mantra of his, but I mean, there's a lot of meat to that ideal.
Yeah, and I think a lot of in terms of like businesses, because I know there's a whole book on like start. I think the title of the book is "Start with Why." Like a lot of businesses and people don't start with that question. They start with, I'm going to make lots of money from this idea, or we're going to do this or that. They never start with like, why are you doing it? And sometimes I know I make people even on our team mad because they'll come up with this idea and they're like, oh, we're going to do this, and I'm like, why? Like, and they're like, what do you mean why? Because it's like it's the thing to do, or it's going to make money. I was like, no, but like, why? Like, why would the retailer who lives in like the middle so and so care about this idea? Like, what's it going to do for their business? Why would this company, this manufacturer care about this product? Why would we just do it? Why? And we don't think about that question a lot. So as Herclots kind of put it, that is an important question that we all should start with and think about and kind of integrate into basically our daily operation as we're working through our problems at work and figuring out what we're doing and why we're doing it.
And I think that's an important question to ask sometimes, especially, I mean, you guys put together a really great publication, and it's a trade publication, so business to business. So it's unique in that aspect. But a lot of the ways, especially the features that you write, Antoine, I mean, they're for a pretty, they're for almost an everyone, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, because like when we first came on board, Tobacco Business was a completely different publication, and I don't think that's a secret. I mean, people looked at it. I mean, I remember I told people, I'm going to go work at Tobacco Business, and they're like, what Tobacco Business? Like, no, Tobacco Business, like the magazine. They're like, what magazine? I was like, Tobacco Business magazine, and they're like, never heard of it. And then you would put it in front of them, and some people are like, oh my gosh, like it's just press releases and it's nothing that we care about, like and it was like this is like 2017, trying to get people on board with this idea. And when we sat down and said like, what can we do editorially, it was like I said, cigarette companies don't want to talk about their product. They're not going to sit there and tell you what's in their product. They don't want the publicity, really. They don't. I mean, most of them. There might be one or two. Most of them, they just don't want that type of story on them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are not a lot of pipe companies out there now, so you could do a story from the perspective of like a pipe maker, but like there's not as many pipe companies out there. It's like the only category that's good for storytelling are cigar people. I was like, they will tell you you could sit have like a 5-day conversation with them, and they will have new stuff to say every single day. And I was like, so we should focus on the cigar people, and again, make it like Entrepreneur Magazine, where it's just for everybody. Like I read stories in Entrepreneur Magazine that have that are about industries that I have no dealings with, have no intentions of ever dealing with, but it's applicable to me in some way. So, that's always been our approach for tobacco business, is to do stories that, like you said, are accessible to everybody. So it could be, this magazine could end up in like a doctor's office somehow. I don't know how it would end up there, but it could end up there, and they'd be like, pick up a story, and they could completely be like, wow, I could apply some of these things about branding or marketing to what I do in my job. Or, it could be somebody who's considers themselves to be a cigar aficionado, and they could still learn something new, and they can be somebody who's never smoked a cigar before, and they're not going to be, spoken down to. They're not going to be left out of the story. There's something there for them too.
No, and I agree. And so to go to your goal, I mean, it is journalism, it is news, but it is a feature and everything. So to go to Michael Herklotz's pieces, which was incredible, it was also very timely in a lot of ways. But the story concludes with the possible sale of Nat Sherman, and I mean, this was weeks before. I mean, almost even days before they announced that.
Right.
No more Nat Sherman. And I know I've had this happen on a number of times where I've had a guest on and we're talking about their business, and days later they announce a new product that, I'm like, well, that would have been nice to talk about, right? And I mean, I don't get mad. It's a little frustrating, obviously. I mean, were you frustrated with the news, or did it play so well because of the timing that it just worked well off of it? Like, I was interested to get your perspective on this.
No, like when we did that story, I mean, we had started talking. I remember it was like early on in the year. So like when we work on stories, it's usually like months in advance. So It was obviously pre-COVID. I mean, that's how far in advance we were working on the story. And I remember saying, I was like, there's 2 people I want to write a story on this year. I'll say, I want to do a story on Michael Herklotz, and I want to do a story on Matt Booth. I was like, those are the 2 cover stories I want to do. And they're like, okay, well, you can do get your cover stories. And so I remember, talking to Herklotz about it, saying, oh, I want to do the story. We got the questions done and everything like that. And like you said, when we did the story, I had no idea that what was going to happen to Nat Sherman was going to happen. So I wasn't mad at all. It was like you said, it was kind of, it was like a month or 2 later after the thing came out that this news started to come out. And I was like, it was a good thing we did it when we did it. I mean, without knowing like where he was going to end up. Because I was like, well, he's going to end up somewhere in the industry, obviously. I said, but to do it now, I mean, it seems cool. It kind of fit into 2 things. But there's been cover stories. You can go back and look at all our cover stories that, it's like they're on the cover one day, and then like by the time that magazine comes out, sometimes they're not even at the company anymore. You're like, wow, great. Like how are we going to spend this one? Or like how are we going to promote this? But it happens, and now you kids can't get mad, and about releases and stuff like that. I feel like I know that sometimes they have like a kind of like sweetheart deal with different blogs and different magazines that say that they're going to release their news to so-and-so first before they do it to us. And you just kind of have to get over it at this point and just like, whatever, do your thing. But at least our story is very unique to us. So nobody else is going to have that, like you said, that cover story or that angle of that story that we've had. So I wasn't really at all upset. I was just like, oh, I was like, well, that's news. It's like,
Well, if you read some of his comments, the way that you wrote it, I mean, again, hindsight always being 2020,
right,
you can kind of read the writing on the wall a little bit, and you can kind of see him, and even his interviews, because I interviewed him right as COVID started last year too. And my interactions with Michael beforehand, Michael's always been carefree, very laid back, very approachable, um, which shocks a lot of people if you just know of Michael Herklotz and don't know Michael Herklotz.
right.
But there was almost like this weight lifted off of him, and he became just a different a different version of himself, and I would argue a better version of himself, because that weight had been lifted. He wasn't really shackled anymore, even though he was still employed by Altria. There, it almost was like the Altria handcuffs were taken off, and he was able to speak his mind in a lot of ways, which he's always done, but kind of with that caveat of the shackles a little bit. And he really loosened up, and you got to really know him, because he did a lot more shows than me. He did deep cuts with you, and then of
Hmm.
course the feature that you wrote. You talk about news and everything, and now this was done probably about 18 months, maybe even 2 years before the sale, and it wasn't even your piece, it was Steven's, on Boris Winterman's.
Right.
And you read that article and you're like, man, this is awesome. Royal Ahio is going to be a player in this industry. And then 2 years later, like you said, to your point, like one day you're on the cover, and then next day, you know
Hmm.
what. But no, I really like that piece, and the way it concluded and everything, I really wanted to get your perspective on it, because I mean, this was literally like even days before it was announced, and everything. So I wanted to see if you saw the writing on the wall. So as I kind of read through the lines a little bit, again, with hindsight being 2020 a little bit on the article. Um, so like I said, I called an audible there because we were just talking about Michael and everything. But you mentioned her in a second. So that's and the person I'm speaking about is Oprah, and I do see a lot. Um, I'm not a Oprah fan. I don't dislike her. I'm not an Oprah fan
Right.
necessarily, but there is one thing that I really do admire about her from an interviewing aspect, is how she actually does relate with her subject in a lot of different ways, and um, having having gotten to know you over the last few minutes and everything, I kind of see I can see how you kind of do you try to mirror her a little bit, or am I just reading into way too much into it?
No, I see my interview style or my approach is a little bit, it's it's like 80% maybe Oprah, and then like, you know, 20% Wendy Williams, where like, Wendy Williams will ask you any questions she wants, and she'll just go there, and like, in, it, she just goes there. And Oprah's like very I mean, her questions are thought provoking, and she always goes for like what she used to call tweetable moments. When Twitter was a big thing, but these moments where it's like quotable moments, and I always look for that moment. Like if I can get an interview, and I'm going through the interview, and somebody says something that's just like profound, you're like, oh yeah, that's the moment. That's like the nugget, and everything. So I always like look for that moment. If I don't get that moment in an interview, then I'm like, like, this is gonna be a hard a hard story to kind of put together, because you have to have like a rallying moment. Um, but I just like her interview style, and the way that, like you said, she tries to approach it. She tries to takes herself out of the interview, because I think early on in my career, when I was first starting to interview people, I always felt like the need to, you know, insert myself in the interview. And now I just have like this moment where I'll interview somebody, and I think it was her who said, sometimes you find out a lot in like moments of silence. So you'll see her sometimes like just sit there and like wait for the person to kind of keep talking, and that's always been
Mhm.
like something that I've learned. Even the other day I was speaking to a pretty big person in the industry, working on another story, and it was just like I asked them a question, and the question came out, and it was like, I was expecting like maybe them to go on, great length about this thing, and it was just like yada 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 yada. Poof, that was it. And I was like, and I think I even said, I was like, that's it. Like, do you want to elaborate? And then they like, oh, okay. And then they elaborated, and it was like got more out of them. So to me, it's always about like bringing that, like pulling teeth sometimes, but getting them to like talk. Like I want you to talk more than I talk to you when I do an interview. So if I can get them to talk, and I'm just sitting there and I'm just like reading the questions, then like all the better.
That's something that definitely can tell, like in your deep cuts interviews and stuff. Like you're like the questions are like so few and far between. I take a different approach. I talk a lot during my interviews, just because again I like to have it a little bit more conversational. But no, silence is one of the best things to use when you're wanting to get to that next level that we talk about, and then you reveal something about a person that's just like you get surprised.
Mm-hmm.
I go back to my conversation with George Ramey, brand ambassador for Camacho, and George is one of the most likable people in this industry, and it's obvious why. He's very colorful, he's entertaining, and he's engaging, he's energetic, and I mean I was really enjoying our conversation, and we were talking a little bit about his background, and I go back to this because he's like, I haven't even, and it was revealed afterwards, he's like, man, I've never even talked about this with anybody. And it was a story about his father was a diplomat in Honduras, and it was during Honduras, and in the 90s, and a very very turbulent time, and someone set a bomb off in his house as a child, and in fact it went off in the living room where 15 minutes beforehand his baby sister had been playing. Now luckily no one was hurt and everyone was fine, but that threw me, because here's George, who talks about Camacho and live bold, and pairing drinks with cigars, and parties, and like all this other stuff, like I said, like a very energetic out there individual, and then this very real moment just kind of creeps in, and it was just, I wasn't silent for the sake of like we were just talking about. I was silent because I was genuinely shocked. Have you had moments like this?
I'm sure I have. I mean, they don't come to mind. Usually my silence is just like I said, like deep cuts. Deep cuts. If I'm silent on there, it's like really because I have like nothing planned. Like I tell people I have no agenda. I was like, we're just gonna come on here for an hour and we're gonna talk, and that's it. Like that's the only agenda. I don't give them questions ahead of time. There's only been like one or two, for some of the big interviews where maybe I've given them a few questions that we might touch on, but everybody else is just like, it's like as if we were out in public. And so I'm always like, I go into it with like no expectations. And I think that's the thing I've learned over the years is, sometimes you interview somebody, and depending on who they are, you come in with so many expectations, like, oh, they're going to talk about this, or oh, there's going to be like, it's going to be this attitude. And then it completely messes up your interview and like what kind of questions you're going to get out of them. So I usually kind of go into it like, again, like even if it's a big person, I'm like, okay, it's no big deal. Like let's just treat them like everybody else. Let's just ask them the question, like, they may be big, but maybe this question seems stupid to me, but it might be, a cool question to ask them. So I've not had like the George moment that you've had with them, but I've had moments where like I'm like, oh, I was like, that's completely cool because I never really expected, that story that they tell might go completely against my expectations of who they are. And that visual, like, like I said, I was speaking to Ernesto Perez Carrillo, and he was telling me about his first experience of smoking cigars, and how it happened when he was playing drums at a club event and stuff like that, and just the way he described it, it was like, oh, that's not very Ernesto. I would never have pictured that. So that was like one of my moments. I was like, that that's an amazing moment, and it makes me go silent just because I was like, is there a way to work that into the story without it being like, this weird moment or whatever? But there's always moments like that with people, that I mean, even Matt Booth, talking about his different, I was like, like why did you announce you were going to retire and then you came back, a month later? Like, like what was that about? And getting that story, it's like, oh, okay. I was like, that makes sense, and going there with people sometimes, and going to the weird places that you don't expect, and you go like, oh, didn't think we were gonna, go there with the interview.
No, definitely. So that kind of leads us into a couple of our fun segments here, and then I want to talk about a couple more of your features that you've done, Antoine, over the last year or so. To the segment, of course, is a personal favorite for my audience here on ELOSOFUMARTAKES. It's our One Must Go segment, and as always, it's brought to you by United Cigars, featuring La Giana Havana and distributors of Jose Dominguez, Bandolero, Garofalo, and the highly acclaimed Atabey and Byron lines. So smoke one today and start living united. Now, Antoine, I don't know if you've had a chance to partake in any of my shows, but this is a segment where we have a little fun, and I kind of try to mold it based on my guest for the evening. And so the concept is I give you three things, and one's got to go. And now this is just for fun. Obviously, you're not really giving up one of these things. And, if anyone out there is watching and is concerned that, Antoine's going to be giving up one of these things, don't worry. It's not, it's not real. It's just for fun. And so, but I've, like I said, in researching for the show and everything, I've learned a lot about you, which again, I've found just incredibly fascinating, a number of things. And one is your eclectic, I guess, fandom of a lot of different things. We talked about music. We've talked about your background in art. We've talked about some other things, and so I know you're a fan of these three things. And so one's got to go. So okay. Here we go. You ready?
Yep.
So the first one's Oprah. Got to start with her. The View.
Okay.
And I think you know where the next one is because I know you're a super fan of her. Rachel Ray.
Oh.
So one's got to go. Oprah, The View, and Rachel Ray. Now, for our audience who may not be aware, these three things are very important to you.
They are, yeah. They're, yeah. I think at this point I could say Oprah would have to go because I think that's surprising to people. But I think as long as I have my knowledge of what Oprah has done up to this point where she has to go, then it's like, yeah. But like The View, I watch The View every single day. And Rachel Ray as well. Rachel Ray is like, I love her interview style and the cooking, and I usually get a few book ideas from her. So yeah, I think I would have to, I can't go a day without seeing what argument Joy Behar and Meghan McCain are going to get into. So I think that makes my day usually. I could be having a horrible day, and just, to me, that's like, The View is like WWE on estrogen for me. So I can't live without that.
So it was really interesting to me. And I think I almost kind of have to, so I'm a fan of like one of these, just to be completely transparent. But I thought about like what your mind answer would be, and I thought it might be Oprah because I was thinking like, not to dismiss her impression that she's made on your life and the lives of obviously millions at this point, but she's kind of served her purpose, right?
Right, exactly.
And these other two are relatively newer and in just in general. So the View I thought was interesting because, like you said, it's kind of like it can be pretty savage. One of the moments I thought of, which I think everyone in the industry is kind of familiar with, which was the big Nick Jonas controversy, which was when he graced
Cigar Aficionado.
Yeah, he graced the cover, Cigar Aficionado. And I just couldn't believe, and we were talking about your piece at the top of the show where you wrote about Black-owned businesses, and like you thought you were just putting this nice little list together, and then all of a sudden, both sides of the aisle start going at you. I mean, it was the same kind of thing. Cigar Aficionado puts out this cover, a young person, because, I mean, up until this point, I mean, I think the youngest person that they had probably graced on their cover had probably been early 30s,
right?
Maybe. And here's a young guy, gracing the cover of Cigar Aficionado, energized the industry, and there were so many people giving Cigar Aficionado shit over this, like how, and in our industry.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the flip side of it, you have secular society giving Nick Jonas shit because he posed for a cover of a cigar magazine. I mean, the audacity of him.
Yeah.
So, I mean, since you're a fan of the show, I thought that there, because they featured that, and of course, Joy Behar just went off.
She goes off about everything.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, she's, pretty extreme on everything. Whatever side she takes, it's just like, she has no, what I call school zone limit. Like it's 100 miles an hour or it's nothing. And and it's usually 100 miles an hour, but like, I know you're a fan of the show, so you probably saw that episode.
I probably did. It's been so long. So many weird moments between then and that.
What was your take on that? Like, I mean, where did you fall, considering your own foray into the industry and your experience with cigars not being like a lot of our audience, and having features similar to this, again, not with celebrities, but mostly people in the industry. What was your take on it? Like, how did you fall on it?
I felt like Nick Jonas, out of most people who land on the cover of Cigar Aficionado, that he at least was a person that, was not just posing with a cigar. Like, he's always, like, if you followed his career and his brothers and all that stuff, they usually are sitting around smoking cigars at some point, him and Joe Jonas. I don't know about Kevin, because Kevin always is the odd one out. He's the family guy and just not part of the whole Nick and Joe thing. So I wasn't surprised by it. I mean, as a media person, you always, I think other media people, I don't know what they thought. I mean, I don't think they had an issue with it. It's always like envy a little bit, probably, because you're always like, oh, I wish we could have got a story like that, to some degree, like some big celebrity, because I think it was like one of their best-selling covers, maybe, or I forget.
I'm sure it was, because it scaled the gamut, right? I mean,
right. I mean, I remember I rushed out to get it. I don't usually rush out to get Cigar Aficionado a lot, so it got me talking about it and got me interested in the magazine again. So the article was fine. I mean, I looked through it. It wasn't anything shocking or scandalous. It wasn't, it was just like a straightforward article. You're like, yeah, like, this guy smokes cigars. Like, I guess from there, maybe I'm trying to think back to what the View probably said about it, or some of the people on there at the time. I think their argument was, he's a younger guy. He has a younger audience.
Right.
He shouldn't be, doing stuff like this. And I remember if you looked at the comments, even outside the View, like on Twitter and Tumblr, there were people on both sides of it, like saying, like he's, smoking of any kind is disgusting. Like, how dare he, do this, and knowing that he has lots of like younger fans or whatever. But again, it's like, it goes back to that whole argument. Like, he's a younger guy, yeah, but I think he was of age where he could be smoking cigars.
Very
so
much
it wasn't like he was like an underage guy. I can't see like younger kids seeing that and saying, oh, I'm gonna go out now and buy me a Padron or something like that.
Right.
A, they wouldn't be able to afford it. B, they just wouldn't. That's just not in their wheelhouse. I mean, this is a very niche industry, so it's not like it's going to. I don't think Nick Jonas expanded it, that far by doing that cover. So I guess I could see both sides of the argument. It was just funny, but it served its purpose, because in the media, what your main purpose is to get eyeballs and to get people to buy your magazines. especially a print magazine, because print magazines usually don't sell as much anymore. To get people to be interested in talking about the magazine and all that stuff. So I think it served its purpose in getting people riled up and talking about the magazine.
Oh, it
But they
certainly
haven't
did.
done anything like that since then, though. It's not like they've. I mean, they easily could have said, "Wow, we need to be looking for younger, you know,
Right?
younger people maybe to get on the magazine." But I mean, since then, like I said, we've had The Rock, Dwayne Johnson on the cover several times. We've had several stories about mobsters. I think we had, Sean Connery, James Bond smoking cigars. So it's not like it changed their editorial outlook or initiative. So
It should have. They
it
missed
should
an
have, but
they missed an opportunity here. I think.
right,
Because here was my biggest thing, and with the outrage on that side of the aisle with like, oh, he's got younger fans and he should be mindful of his influence. And I was like, I think he is, because he's also he's a huge health nut because he's diabetic.
right.
And he has to be, and he's taking great pains to adjust his lifestyle to lead a healthy lifestyle. And the occasional cigar, anything in moderation is healthy. Anything in moderation. So my point was, would Joy Behar have been a problem if he had done same company had been on the cover of Wine Spectre
No,
or Whiskey Advocate, same company.
no, because alcohol is usually, for whatever reason, not vilified like tobacco.
Exactly. It's a legal product that's enjoyed by adult consumers,
Right.
but it's the stigma, and that was the thing that just like boiled my blood about it. Was like, I couldn't believe that people are so jaded to not recognize the hypocrisy in their own judgment.
Like, you never hear about somebody like smoking so many cigars that they get into a car accident. But you hear about it, like you said, about,
Yes.
drinking enough wine or any type of spirit where, they become a little bit loose and something bad happens. So I've never heard of anybody overdosing on a cigar, even though there are a few double Ajero cigars that could
Probably.
easily maybe tip you over and make you a little bit sick. But yeah.
Oh, absolutely. So like, I thought that I wanted to get your opinion on that. And then, but I also know you're a huge fan of Rachel Ray, which we had this discussion in the small circle of cigar media one time, and it was Rachel Ray versus Giada de Laurentiis. And I got to say, I was in the minority because I was a Rachel Ray. Nothing against Giada
Yeah.
at all. Really nice to look at, brilliant chef, love some of her recipes and everything. But I'm a Rachel Ray fan too, and I looked at it from a practical standpoint. I was like, listen, I've done some of Giada's recipes, and like, I'm in the kitchen like all fucking day. Like Rachel Ray, it's 30 minutes, man. That's what I got to do. Like,
Exactly.
I've
It's
got
just
kids. I got to get something on the table.
exactly. And it's easy. It's usually easy food. And I just like that her show is not just about cooking. It's like interview stuff too. So, and she does like pretty big interviews, and she always, like, again, she's like Oprah in that she gets to like the human part of the story. Like, it's not just, wow, you're a celebrity. Like, let's talk about celebrity stuff. It's usually relatable stuff. And she has like human interest stories usually on her show too, about people trying to do good things for dogs or their neighbors or stuff like that. And we all need that, kind of positive spin. So it's, to me, it's yeah. Rachel Ray has like always been like one of those people that I just like to watch for the cooking, for the interview style, for everything. And she's not, and you've not really heard anything mean about her like in the press. Like, you have to really look hard, and some of those stories that are out there are kind of outlandish.
Yeah.
Her house burned down last year, and she just kept doing her show. I mean, most
Yeah.
people have been like, I gotta take time off. She's like, the day after, she's like, here's my house, it's burned down, but I'm gonna still continue to do my show, and that stuff is going on in the background. So I was like, wow.
Yeah, she's incredibly tenacious. I mean, this is a woman who, like, a couple of times, She got in a car wreck one time, still went to work that day. And we're not talking about like a little fender bender. Her car flipped multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
And she went to work. She literally cut off her finger. This is a great story. Her first day at Food Network, she cut off her finger, super glued it back on, did the show, then went to the hospital.
Yep.
I mean,
she's got mugged once. I mean, she just like has all the stuff.
Crazy. So thank you, Antoine. I really appreciate it. That was our one must go segment. A little bit more in depth than I wanted to, but I know that these were three things that you loved, and I just thought it would be, and they had their own interesting topic aside from them. So, and of course, it's always the segment's always brought to you by United Cigars, featuring La Giana Havana, distributors of Jose Dominguez, Bandolero, Garofalo, and the highly acclaimed Atabey and Byron lines. So remember, smoke one today. Start living united. So, Antoine, you were mentioning Rachel Ray's affinity for human interest, and it's somewhat of a motivation in our both of our interview styles too. Is what we've alluded to all evening, and this has become actually my personal favorite part of the show is when I started this segment on my birthday late last year, and so I've asked my guests to bring to the table a charity or a nonprofit that they would like to raise awareness for and possibly bring attention and if possible, if people feel called to raise some money for as well. And I posed the question to you, and I was really excited for this, and so I'm going to give it a little brief introduction, but I'm going to step away for a moment and kind of give you the floor. So I'm going to go quiet like you do in your interviews sometimes, but I will be back. But I want you to kind of take the floor from me here. But your charity of choice is A Home for My Family, which is ProCigar's nonprofit foundation that they started, which is geared towards it's a housing program that's geared towards the disadvantaged employees and deserving employees within this premium cigar industry. So, like I said, I'm going to give you the floor, and I'll be right back.
Yeah, I think so. A Home for My Family. What I've seen, I think they introduced it at ProCigar 2020, and what I liked about it was that we always focus on people in the industry, and the fact that here's an organization, ProCigar, they put on a great event every year. They do work throughout the year, but they created this charitable foundation that basically gives people a chance to, to honor the people who are making the cigars. So it's a pretty simple and straightforward or charitable organization. They choose a family or a deserving worker, and they give this person a great gift, which is a house. And I think it's a great cause, and that is one that anybody who's a cigar smoker, and especially who's a fan of Dominican cigars, should want to get behind and support. And I think, like I said, it's part of ProCigar. So I think the website is procigar.org.
Yeah, and I actually have the website up, and I'm linking the people feel called. I'm linking the donate link into tonight's chat as well as it'll be in the show notes as well. But a great organization.
Yeah, and I like it. It's pretty simple and straightforward. It's like it's exactly what it sounds like. I mean, they choose randomly from the different ProCigar members. So people like Davidoff and La Aurora, and a list of other companies that are part of the ProCigar. They randomly choose, like I said, a worker to receive a new house. So it's like it's a great way to honor the people who are actually making the product.
You've so how many pro cigars have you actually covered?
I have covered 2. So my first one was 2019.
So, my partner on Cigar Coop Primetime Special Edition, Will Cooper, has said that it's by far the best festival experience that he's been a part of. So I'm interested to get your take on it. I have not participated in ProCigar. It's something that it's definitely on my to-do list for sure. It's something that the idea of it is very exciting to me because there are so many great manufacturers down in the Dominican, and they do so much more than just make cigars, as we were just talking about. What what was your, I guess, your first experience like, and would you encourage a lot of people to participate?
Yeah, I mean, my experience was it's funny because we're like you and I, we're always in the mindset of the American cigar media. So when you go there, you realize that we're in the minority. So it's very international, um, mindset. But with that being said, um, like it was the only. It's like your chance in a 3 or 4 day, however many days you take part in it, span to really get to experience so much of the cigar in a Dominican cigar industry at one time. The chance to go on these tours of some of the biggest, well-known brands and factories. If you do the full tour, you get to visit Tabacalera de Garcia, which is the largest cigar, factory in the world, basically. But you get the chance to see the factories of where EP Carrillo's made, where La Hora's made, PDR, a bunch of other, General Cigar, Dominicana, La Flor Dominicana. There's so many other companies that I can't even name, but it's just a great.
De Los Reyes, you mentioned PDR, Tabacalera de la Palma, Hoshi
Right.
Blanco's place.
Casada. I mean, like you go down there, like I said, and you're immersed in this thing, and it's really well organized. In that, like I said, the first couple of days, I in 2019 I did the full thing, and then the second year, 2020, I just did half of it. So I just kind of came in the Santiago part and did 2 factory tours, and then they had like a field day, which was kind of like an open tent thing where everybody was there in one place basically, and you got to go around and take pictures with people and talk to people, and I mean brand owners, like I said, everybody who was anybody at ProCigar was at this event. And then you go back to the hotel for a couple of hours, and then at night, every night it's like a different gala dinner, a party, something. You come home with a bunch of cigars. Some of them are pretty rare. Some of them are things that are going to be released later on in the year. And sometimes you don't even think about it until you get home and you open it up and you're like, wow, I got like this, Davidoff year of the whatever it is. And, that's a sometimes like a $40 cigar in the US. And here it is as part of your, welcome packet, or part of the dinner packet for one night. So it's a really fun event that I tell people that if you really want to know the industry and get to know the industry without having to go on a tour of your own and organize it, go to ProCigar. They do all the organizing for you, provide transportation to these places, and it's just fun.
So this was a question. So I'm glad you brought up the cigars that you were able to be gifted and stuff, and that's really awesome. And but for someone who doesn't, as we've talked about, who doesn't smoke a lot of cigars and everything, I mean, how big is your collection now? I mean, do you have a couple humidors? Like, do you keep them at the office? Do you keep them at home? Like, what does Antoine Reid's collection look like?
Like my apartment looks like a cigar store right now because it's like so. I have Boveda bags everywhere because I've been trying to rebag everything, but I have like a little Daniel Marshall made humidor that he gave me a couple years ago that has all my Davidoff stuff in it right now. On top of it, I have a huge Year of the Rat humidor from Drew Estate, which has all my Drew Estate, well, part of my Drew Estate stuff in it. And then, like I said, in my bedroom, it's just like anything you could possibly think of, I basically have right now. And like I said, I've gotten stuff like I just last week I got the new Macanudo Inspirado Brazilian thing that they just released. So, sometimes I'm lucky enough to get, like I said, things that are just coming out. So it's a little bit of everything. Like I said, people always are like, oh, like that's probably the best part of the job. And sometimes it is, but I tell people too, I was like, I spend a lot of money sometimes buying stuff that, not everybody's going to send you stuff. So if you want to try stuff, you have to kind of buy it yourself. So I also spend a lot of money kind of buying stuff to kind of add to the collection and smoke whenever I, feel like it.
So, and I've heard you say this before in other interviews. You're much like the rest of your personality would suggest. You're very eclectic in your smoking. You don't
Mhm.
stick to one brand or anything. But what's something what's a couple things over the last year? I've heard you reminisce about Perdomo, Lot 23. I know is a personal favorite of yours. But like, what are some of the cigars that you've kind of maybe discovered in the past year that you've just really kind of drawn to? And they could be new releases. They could be something that's been on the market for years. I mean, I'm just curious.
The Avo Classic Maduro, I think that was a 2020 release.
Mhm.
That's
The
one that kind
re-release,
of,
yeah.
yeah, that's one that really left an impression, I would say. Um, the Room 101 Farce, I know I tried that one when I was at
The,
an
Ma-
event.
the Maduro, because that's what I'm smoking right now.
I don't know if it was a Maduro. I don't think so. It might. I
Oh,
don't know. It had like a grayish label, whatever that one
oh,
is.
the
But
original farce. Okay, yeah,
right,
the Habano wrapper that he uses.
I
Yeah.
think so. That was a good one. I had this EP Carrillo at ProCigar last year. I forget which one it was. It was one of those that we got again, kind of at the event. I really like that one. Like I said, I just try so many different things. There's really nothing that I've tried that I'm like I really don't like. I can't that nothing comes to mind that something that I'm like I really hate this cigar. Uh,
Do you gravitate more towards bold,
I
more mild? Are you all over the place like I am? Or
I go for more mild usually, but I have there have been some stronger cigars where I'm like this is not that bad. Like a lot of the La Flor Dominicana stuff.
Mhm.
Um, that I remember we were at Pro Cigar 2019 and we went to I did the La Flor Dominicana tour and I remember I was with somebody and she said, Antoine, I hope you had breakfast this morning. She said, don't smoke one of these cigars without having something on your palate. And I was like, oh, I'll be fine. And I was okay, but it was just like, oh, it was like 9 o'clock in the morning in the Dominican Republic, with this La Flor Dominicana cigar. And then I remember I had another one that night, and that the one at night was like the one that was like I was like, oh, okay, that's a bit much. That was a lot. So, but again, it wasn't a bad experience. It was just sometimes they're a little bit heavier than uh, what I anticipate.
So, in my youth, I was a lot more immature, as we all were. And I remember giving one of my favorite things to do was take fellow, fellow college classmates to my favorite cigar lounge in Fort Worth, Pop Safari, and who I actually later worked for the proprietor, Perry Tong, who unfortunately passed away earlier this year. Um, and One of my favorite things to do is to hand them a La Flor Dominicana, um, and just see what their reaction was to it. And I remember there was this one kid, his name's Jim. I went to school with him. I mean, just imagine the most energetic person you've ever met in your life. Imagine Matt Booth, but and multiply that energy by about 5, and that was Jim. And I gave him a La Flor Dominicana, and that kid did not talk for the rest of the night. Apparently, he went back to his dorm, apparently laid down and just kind of stared at the top of his bunk, like into oblivion for the rest of the night. To where the next day, speaking of your experience with, uh, you know, substance and everything being lacking and stuff, I was a member of a Christian fraternity, and Jim was not of age to be drinking. And so I got a call the next morning from his roommate,
Oh.
and who's also in our fraternity, and he was like, "Hey man, I want to talk to you." And I was like, "Okay." Kind of like the similar call you got about your blog. And I was like, "What's going on?" And he's like, "Hey, I want to talk to you about Jim." And I was like, "What, is he okay? Is everything all right? We had a good time last night." He's like, "Yeah, that's what I want to talk to you about." I'm like, "Okay." And he's like, listen, man, gave me the, it's okay to do what you got to do and blah, blah, but, Jim's not, Jim's only 19, et cetera, et cetera. Blah. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, he tells me how Jim reacted the night before. And I was like, he's like, man, it's just not cool to get, our brothers drunk, man. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about, Nathan. I haven't had a drop to drink. And yeah, and neither did he, unless he drank something when he got to the dorm. And he's like, what are you talking about? I was like, man, all we did was have a cigar. And he's like, did you notice anything weird? I was like, yeah, he didn't talk. And he was like, that was the cigar? And I was like, that was the cigar. And so from that point on, I never gave a first-time smoker a Florida Dominicana ever again, just because of that terrible experience. But Jim still smokes cigars, so I didn't ruin it for him. So I still count it as a win. But ProCigar is definitely one of those things that I definitely want to get to. It sounds like an amazing experience. Like you said, very international, which just sounds really appealing to me. I'd love to get other people's perspectives.
It's funny because like you go there and they say, I mean, nobody really because like the media always sticks together for some reason. Like all of us U.S. media, it's usually like, it's like cigar press people, cigar snob people, tobacco business, or whatever company we're with at the time. It's like we're all like in one like huddle group, Cigar Coop, some of the other writers, freelance writers, all of us American press people always stay together. And because you go to ProCigar and they're like, international people, we all, this table is for you. And like, you're not used to like you being the international person. So you go there and you're like, they want us to sit like in the middle, like up front. And you're like, that's okay. And like, no thanks. I mean, and it's just like, but it's just like you go there. And like I said, you're suddenly the international guest. And you're like, oh, me? Like we're international here. It's like, it's just so funny. It's just a different experience, but it's worth going. Like if you can go, I would say definitely go and have that whole experience. Like for me, after I did like the whole week, like the first part, I was just like, you know what, I'm good. I'm just gonna fly into Santiago and do like the factory tour part, and I'm good. Like, but people like the first part. It to me, it's not my full thing, but especially like the bus ride to Santiago. It's like I would rather just fly straight into Santiago, be at the hotel, be done. I don't the bus ride up there or whatever is just like not for me, but it could be for other people.
I took a bus ride when I went on the Davidoff tour from Santiago all the way to we finished the week in at Casa de Campo, which is on the coast, and I just remember being on that bus for it was like 6 hours, and they kept saying like, oh, we're a couple hours away. Like we were a couple hours away for like 6 hours, or we were 45 minutes away for like 3 hours. It was ridiculous. I mean, gotta hand it to the bus driver. He was very safe, and clearly not in a hurry. And if you were in a hurry, then you were on the wrong bus. But that, yeah, I'm really excited about hopefully going to ProCigar one day. So we've mentioned him quite a bit this evening, and one of the features that you did recently in the past year was on Matt Booth, who I'm very friendly with, and I know you're friends with, and I thought it was a really, really great piece that you did. One thing that grabbed me right off the bat, and I could not think of a better way to describe Matt Booth's story, which I've explored on this show and then just personally in conversation, but I could not think of a better descriptor than here's a man I knew, and you grabbed me off the page. Here's a quote: "A career worthy of a Netflix binge." And I was like, that's Matt Booth. And that was how did you come up with that?
I have no idea. I have no even, it's funny because like sometimes when I write stuff, I just go into this weird zone and I just like write whatever's in my head or whatever. So obviously that probably came from something that he said, because that seems like a very Matt Booth thing to describe himself, his story. So I'm pretty sure that he probably came up with that, and I probably wrote it down somewhere and saying, we're going to have to work that into the story somewhere. it's really funny because a lot of times I'll write stuff and then I leave it. I send it out into the world. Like I don't like to reread my stuff. I just because I don't want to second guess it or say, "Ooh, I don't know that person might get mad at this or whatever." I just kind of I put a lot of thought into like when I'm writing it, and then I read it, and then I send it off and don't think about it anymore. So it's funny that you say that phrase because I'm like, did I really write that part? I was like, that sounds kind of cool. I was like, but I was like, I'm pretty sure Matt Booth probably said that at some point because when we did his interview, we did it. Usually, I'll interview somebody like one time, and then I'll do my own research outside of that. With other interviews they've done places, and that's it. But with Matt Booth, it was like a multi-day. Like we would talk for 30 minutes here, call it a day. Talk for an hour this day, call it a day. When I came out of that interview with him, it was like the transcription was 33 pages.
Sounds about right.
And then I had to condense 33 pages down into basically 3,000 words. So that was like, I was like, oh crap, like this is going to be like a monumental task, like to figure out how to do this.
Could do an anthology, man. Just release it in volumes.
Yeah. I told him, I was like, I can write my own novel, just based on Matt Booth.
And I really like the kind of, it ended up being kind of a tee up because you started a project when COVID started taking place because like we were all at home and a lot of people who don't have time on their hands suddenly found time on their hands. And I mean, I've been doing the same thing. I've been doing the show. This is the 167 take. It was around well before COVID started, and during COVID it was pretty much the same, other than the fact that I could actually talk to a lot of people that I couldn't before because their schedules actually permitted it, which was kind of nice. But you started a project that I've really, speaking of binge worthy, I mean, this is some really great conversations that you've had, and you're wearing the t-shirt right now for, and that's our deep cuts live that you do on Instagram, which is an interesting platform. In terms of engagement, I mean, the perfect platform
right
for impromptu conversations and everything. And I mentioned Deep Cuts now because it was the first one you did was with Matt, so it ended up being this kind of precursor to this feature that you would do later on in the year. And I'm not sure the timeline. I'm not sure if you'd already interviewed him and then you interviewed him. What was the timeline there?
I think we did Deep Cuts. Oh wait, Deep Cuts was in March, and his story wasn't until later that year. So Deep Cuts came first. And I remember Michael Herklotz was doing like his own Instagram live like almost every day, and I was like, wow, that's kind of cool. Like, kind of, he was different people that he knew. It wasn't always cigar people.
It was great.
And I thought, I was like, God, I was like, this is kind of awesome. I was like, I like it. And then my friends Amy and Erica were doing the
lounge experience.
The lounge experience. They were doing their thing on Instagram Live, and I was like, wow. I was like, but it wasn't really my thing because I was like, I never used Instagram but to post a picture and call it a day. So I was like, maybe I should start my own one day. They're like, oh yeah, do it. And I was like, I don't know. I was like, because this whole, how does it work? Is the connection gonna be good enough? And it was like so many things. I was like barriers I was putting up, and finally I was like, I'll do it. And I was like, who'd be the first person I would want to do? And I was like, so I remember texting Matt Booth and saying, Matt Booth, like, I need your help. And he was like, I'll do it. And I was like, okay. And so that was the first one, and it was fun. I was like, it was different. And then I just kept doing it, even after that, because there was like you said, there was like nothing else to do. Like we weren't going to trade shows. We weren't going to events. There was all this time on the hand, and I was like, how can I use this time wisely? And I was like, it'd be nice to do stuff to get better at something, not the art of conversation. And that's why I was like, oh, it'll be all impromptu. I won't give people questions like I usually do with a magazine, because when I'm doing a magazine interview, you get the questions ahead of time, because I don't want you to be surprised or say that you got something was talked about that shouldn't have got talked about. So I usually give people a pretty good, list of questions that we're going to talk about. But for deep cuts, I'm just like, we're just gonna talk for an hour. It'll be whatever, whatever's coming up with you all, or what projects you're working on, or what you watched on Netflix and stuff like that. So it turned to this really organic, fun, just open-ended conversation. And I like Instagram Live because it kind of caps you after an hour. So I always feel like I have things to do, and I feel like they have things to do. So I was like, oh, we're out of time. Let's just like leave it at that, and we'll, we can do like a revisit later on down the line. But it was fun. It was different, and I do it periodically now. I mean, we've all kind of gotten out a little bit more lately, so it's kind of harder sometimes to pin down people like it, than it was last year. But it's something that I do, but there's been so much magazine stuff to do and TPE stuff to do that it's kind of, taking a back burner. But hopefully, as the year goes on, I'll get back to doing it on a regular basis.
Because I think the last one you did in March you mentioned Erica a minute ago of the lounge experience. I think that was the last one you did. That was back in March, right?
No, I did Erica back in December. I think the last one I did was Emperor's Cut, and it might have been a couple weeks ago.
Okay, I missed that one. I need to catch up on that. So, but yeah, I mean, these are some great conversations. We're talking about, I mean, the whole thing of binge worthy, like my show is not binge worthy. We've had a couple hour long conversation at this point. So, I mean, that's typical for my show. But if you're wanting some really nice, great conversation, I mean, these are some people that are, I mean, like I said, I loved the one with Ernesto Perez Carrillo Jr. I thought that was sensational. I think you caught him in a lot of ways in his element. I've had the opportunity, the privilege of interviewing him, and I thought it was an amazing interview. But I mean, what you were able to capture in an hour was just was terrific. It was just sensational.
I remember David from EP Carrillo reached out to me. He was like, Antoine, like, you're doing these shows, and I wanted to know, do you want to have Lisette or Ernesto on your show? And I was like, yeah, like that would be cool. I didn't think that they would want to be on my little thing I'm doing. It was like, oh no, like I'll see which one wants to do it. And I was like, either one will be fine with me. And I was like, I enjoy talking to Lisette as well. I don't know if you've ever spoken to her, but she has a lot of knowledge, especially about the marketing and stuff about the company. And so I was thinking it'll probably be Lisette. So I was like, that'll be cool. I was like, and then he came back and said, okay, it's going to be Ernesto. And I was like, oh my God, like, it's going to be Ernesto? Like, cool. I was like, I don't know. But like, again, like I gave them a little bit of an idea of what we will talk about, but it was nothing like these are the exact questions you're going to be asked. It was just like organic. It was just like we were just sitting in front of each other, randomly talking. And what I liked about that interview was that more people ask questions than they usually do. Because sometimes I get on there and nobody has a question. So it's just me, keeping the conversation going for an hour. But for that one, they were like, what kind of tobacco do you like to work with? What? So I was just like, okay, Ernesto, you got some questions. And he was just like going at it. Like, he was like, oh yeah, like this, this. And it was just a fun like hour, and it was like a really interesting. And same for Rafael Nodal. I was like, Alta just reached out to me. Hey, do you want to interview Rafael? I was like, yeah.
Great. It's a great interview. Gosh, I love it.
Right. I was like, God, I was like, yeah. I was like, I would love to interview him if he wants to, sit on the show. It was like, okay, well, he'll do the interview. He'll probably want to play some piano. And I was like, if he can do whatever he wants to. So it was such like, that's what I enjoyed about it. It was like people weren't just sitting in their office, doing these interviews. I mean, they were like at home like everybody else.
Right.
So it was just, that I knew I could never recapture that moment. And I was like, it's fun for what it is. And then I was like, let's see how long this thing goes. I didn't have no intention of doing it like the whole year. It's just like we'll see how long it lasts. And now it's become like a kind of mainstay experimental thing that I do on the side. Like, and some of those interviews end up, helping to lead into some editorial later on down the line. Cause I'm like, oh, that was a good, story that we didn't even think about. Let's follow up an editorial.
No, absolutely. You know, you mentioned Lisette Carrillo, and her prowess in the marketing aspect, and others too, obviously. But you know, speaking of marketing, I think one of the really interesting stories in this industry, and I had the opportunity to interview him a few weeks ago, and then you also had a piece I think that came around the same time, was Sean Williams. You
Hmm.
know, and you know Sean's got an incredible story, and I think you know, one of the, and I've heard him say it several times, and he said it in your interview as well. He talks about the story about how he got the call, or the text rather, from Rick Rodriguez about becoming on board and working with the Cohiba brand. And I loved that you shared that with your audience about how he was like, I wasn't aware Cohiba needed a guy.
Right. Yeah, like it was funny because our conversation started with a text because he had been on deep cuts before, and something like I remember I was out walking one weekend, like a Saturday morning, and I get this text from Sean, and it was something about like he alluded to something about like we had never done a story on him, for the magazine, and maybe it came right after the Matt Booth story. I think he read the Matt Booth story and said, "Oh, I've never gotten a story yet in the magazine." I was like, we should, definitely do something about it. And when I got when we did the interview, I was like sitting there reading like looking back at the responses and stuff like that, and like really thinking about it. And I remember going into the my boss and pitching the story. I was like, this is an opportunity to like you know do a cover story. I think Sean's like, again, he's been in the industry forever. You talk to lots of these smaller brands, these boutique brands, and they usually say, like, who do you go to for advice? I go to Sean Williams for, advice on how to do it because he did it himself. So
Hmm.
I was like, this is a cool story. I think that will make a good cover story. And I was like, nobody, again, like, what other magazine is going to do it at this point? Because there's not a lot of magazines out there anymore. And the cigar magazines that are out there are mostly celebrity based or model based. So it was like, why not? Like, let's do it. And he was like, go for it. If you think it'll make a good story, do it. And that's what we did. So it was a really good story.
I think one of the most, and in hindsight, in my own interview, I wish we'd kind of tackled this aspect more. But one of the things I learned about him, or kind of realized back playing my own conversations with Sean and getting to know him over the years, and what you captured pretty poignantly was, here's a guy who got into the industry lightning fast, started smoking cigars. You know, 18 months later, he's down, you know, having conversations with Plasencia about El Primer Mundo, right? And for a guy who started off that lightning fast, and this is something you captured very well in your piece on him, was he's very calculating. He has a very calculating nature about him, despite being that kind of fast to starter. Did you pick up on that at all, or was that just me reading your piece and coming to my own conclusion?
It's probably, you probably picked up on that and came to your own conclusion. Like my thing is like, I always tell people like, I never know what people are going to get out of half of these stories. So it's always fun for me to like hear that you picked up on that in a story, because it's probably something that I've not thought about. I just try to tell people, I was like, I'm going to tell your story however you want me to tell, put it out there. And the fact that you picked up on that is good, because that's, I mean, he is pretty, I mean, the way you described is how he is.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, I've been a fan of Sean's for a number of years, and I think that, you know, again, and that's, I mean, we can go round and round on this, and we've said it several times tonight. It just, you know, the stories that are in this industry are just, I mean, there's just so many. It's incredible. It's a never, you know, you can keep going back to the well, and and you can keep going, like you said, 33 pages of dialogue with Matt Booth. I mean, you could go back several times and you'll still scratch the surface on someone like him. It's just, it's an incredible, you know, it's incredible.
exactly.
You know, I don't want to spoil this too much because this is your most recent cover story. I don't, you know, so if you guys want to check out the article, go get the magazine. I know Antoine would appreciate it. But the latest pieces you did was on Dylan Austin of
Right.
Davidoff. I will grab this one piece, and like, if you guys want to catch the rest of the story, you gotta go check out the magazine. But I didn't know this about him. So Dylan, grew up in a family. His grandparents were Cuban, and he went to a all Cuban boys school in Florida when he was a child. And it's interesting because we were talking about diversity at the top of the show, and here's a white guy, but he was placed in a from a very early age. He was placed in a very challenging environment because of diversity. And I thought that was a really interesting, something very interesting that I discovered about Dylan. I had no idea. About it. And I mean, so again,
and I didn't
grabbing
either.
off the page.
I mean, we had never. I mean, Dylan's somebody that I've seen. Like I said, I've done a Davidoff trip, so we spent time together and stuff like that. But we never sat down and said, like, I never sat down with him and said, like, tell me your story, like, let me know like what your background is. So really, I learned a lot about him by doing that interview. So, and that was, and I tell people that, like, we could have easily have done a story about Davidoff and the business of Davidoff and all this stuff, but I was like, how many people really want to hear that story? I mean, you would hear it through Dylan, but at the same time, like, don't you want to know about the people who are behind the scenes who are working? And here's, Dylan, now the president of Davidoff of Americas, but do you really know his story? Like how he got to where he is? And I felt like not a lot of people knew all the nitty gritty details about who he was or what his background is or what his personality is. And, he's very active on social media, but as again, like unless you are in the industry, I don't think you get the chance to really know Dylan. So I thought the cover story was a great chance to kind of say, this is the guy, like this is the guy who's in charge of Davidoff and the personality. And you kind of see his personality kind of woven into the team at Davidoff now and the products and, their different take that they have right now compared to maybe the Davidoff of a couple of years ago with HK and Jim Young. It's a completely different company right now.
No, I completely agree. So I just got a couple more questions here, Antoine, and this is the time of the evening. I always thank my guests. I know how late it is for you and for you to sit down on Mother's Day, no less, to sit down and have a conversation with me over the span of a couple hours, and so we can get to know you a little bit and just hear your story and the stories that you tell it's been really eye-opening. I've just really appreciated it, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you.
So last couple of questions here that I had. So we were talking a little bit about this before the show. Obviously, tobacco business will obviously be at TPE.
Yes.
But unfortunately, you won't be there this year. Correct?
Correct.
I mean, I know at some level that's got to be disappointing for you.
Yeah, but at the same time, like we have worked so. When I say we, I mean the team at TMG Tobacco Media Group has worked so hard to put on the show this year that everything has to be right. And one of the parts about being right is make sure that everybody is kept safe. So there's several people, on the team who just can't make it to the show this year because our vaccination schedules didn't really align with the show. And I think you and I talked about that, early on about how it was like, if it was, if we could have gotten our vaccinations a week or two earlier, it'll be a completely different story. But
oh yeah,
being on the safe side and having people who are like immunocompromised in your family, you just have to kind of say, this is not going to be like the last TPE. I mean, I tell people, I was like, TPE 2020, 21, which is going to happen this week, is going to be an awesome event. It's going to be a first time that a lot of people are going to get to see each other. There's going to be new products, which I know is like the main driver behind the trade show. There's going to be new products to be had. An awesome opening party. I'm sure lots of business and lots of networking, which is the bloodline of a show. That being said, there's also TPE 2022 that's really just around the corner. It's in January of 2022. So it's like less than a year away. So we're, I might not be able able to make it at this one, and there might be other people out there who might not be able to make it to this one for various reasons, but you need to put the TPE 2022 show kind of on your radar, because that will probably be even better, because hopefully we won't have to deal with social distancing and mask and 6 foot apart and all this other, rules and regulations that we have to kind of abide by just to get this show greenlit.
So, recognizing that TMG, Tobacco Media Group, which you're a part of, is only in no short order, but is only a very small facet of Critic International, which runs the Tobacco Bless Expo. I mean, what have you been hearing from everyone on your, I guess, your collective team, the global team, if you will, about this event? I mean, are people coming, or are you guys at capacity, under capacity? Like, what is that? What's it going to look like for? I mean, we won't know until this week and everyone starts showing up. But I mean,
right.
What's it sounding like at headquarters, I guess?
Well, I would say months ago, like February, it was a big question mark. It was like, what does, Vegas hadn't come up with any or Nevada, I should say, hadn't come up with any type of reopening plan. We had no idea what the capacity limits were going to be. We had no idea what the vaccination rollout was really going to look like. There are so many questions. It was like, can we really make it over the hurdle to have a show this year? And there's been lots of things. Basically, it's been like a week to week thing where we've just had to work through all these issues. And what we've gotten to now is, like, I think a lot of people in the industry, even as, late as last month, April, were like, is this show really going to happen, or is it not going to happen? And now I think most people say, oh, so it is happening. And now we've seen, like, the attendance kind of have a huge jump over where we were even last year, in terms of, I can't speak like numbers, but I could say, especially in terms of like premium tobacconists who are interested in coming to the show, it's above where it was, even for 2020. And I think it's just because people really want an in-person event. They want to see, they're a little bit tired of Zoom. I think Zoom is awesome. I think it will still be here, into the future, but this is the first chance for a lot of people to get together. This is the first chance for them to, network, and there's the stuff that you can get done in person that you can't, unfortunately, get done over a Zoom or email or phone call or FaceTime. You can't beat an in-person event. So, like you said, we're not going to know what it looks like in terms of like the actual attendance until obviously later on this week, but I think it's going to be well attended from what I've heard. I think the exhibitors kind of feel a little bit more confident now that they have heard. I've seen exhibitors kind of asking on Facebook their customers, are you coming? And a lot of people are saying, yeah, we're going to come. And they're posting on Instagram that they're coming, and there's new exhibitors. So I'm feeling confident, and I think the team is feeling confident, or else we wouldn't be having a show this year. If we didn't feel confident that this was going to happen, I don't think we would have pushed through. But we went through the safety plan thing, and you probably have seen 10,000 emails about it. There was a very long process of making sure that we got the safety plan worked out. It's been worked out. It's been approved of. So it might be a little bit of a different show in terms of just a little bit more rules to make sure that everybody stays safe. But obviously it's happening. People are coming. And I think the people who do show up to TPE 2021 are going to have a good time and get some business done.
Awesome. So will Tobacco Business be covering PCA, and will you be there?
I have not heard that we were going to PCA, but I guess in some capacity we'll be covering at least the exhibitors who show up there, but I've not heard that we will be going to PCA this year in terms of Tobacco Business.
So is that discussion even on the table, or you're just you're just not certain at this point?
I'm not certain. I think that's probably well above my pay grade. My pay grade, that's like another level that I'm not privy to. So I have not heard that we were planning to go to PCA this year, though.
Well, I'll be there this year, and I'm hoping that you guys do come, because I'd love to actually talk to you in
Yeah,
person and see you there, and we can cover some of the show together. So I think it'll be interesting and fun. So
yeah,
um,
definitely.
so this is my last question of the night, and as always, it's always our curveball segment, which is sponsored by Dunbarton Tobacco and Trust. Fastballs or curveballs, doesn't matter. Since the company's inception, Steve Sock has been knocking them out of the park 6 consecutive years in the consensus top 3. Yeah, I looked it up, and I even got fact checked by my colleague Cigar Coop on that. So 6 consecutive years. So here's my curveball question for you to conclude our night here, Antoine. So it's up to interpretation. Again, just another fun question for you. But as a purveyor of vinyls and music and albums that you are, who in the cigar industry, who's in the cigar industry's album would you buy, and what kind of album would it be? So would it be, so and so, and would it be a music album? Would it be a comedy album? Would it be something different? Just you're like I said, up to your interpretation. And I have a few ideas of who you might grab, but maybe you'll catch me off guard here with somebody.
If let me see, cigar industry albums. Uh, well,
They don't even have to be a musician. It would just be like, oh, that'd be really cool if, like I said, it's completely open ended, just for fun.
well, I mean, I think I've always heard, Nick Perdomo, and then you go into his office and there's a big drum set.
Right?
I think we want to see the drum, and there's so many drummers in the industry. So
Yeah.
I would, maybe it's
Ernesto, Michael Herklotz. Yeah.
I was about to say, so maybe it's like a I don't know what it is about cigar people and drums, but I would love to see like a little compilation. Now that's what I call cigar drummer music or something like that, where we get a collection of these people who are drummers, playing. Because I always see, like I said, Nick Perdomo and the drums in his office, Herklotz in the drums. There's so many people, in Ernesto, like I said, in the drums. I would want to see like a compilation album of them playing their favorite whoever, maybe a cover album of some sort.
Have you heard any of them play? I've heard Nick play. I haven't heard Michael play. I haven't heard Ernesto play. Have you heard any of them play?
I don't think I have.
Because Nick's really good. Like, I mean, I don't know why that shouldn't be surprising. Like,
Right.
it's in his office, for crying out loud. He probably uses it to
I think
blow
I've
off
heard
some
him
steam.
play like in passing at at one of the IPSPRs I've been to. Like you hear the drums, you're like, oh, it's Nick. And you pass by the booth and everybody's around. You're like, oh, especially me because I'm shorter, so I'm always like, who is that? Like, what's going on over there? So I'm sure. I think I've heard him play, but yeah, I mean, some of the other people, Ernesto and Michael, yeah, I want to hear that.
Well, awesome. Well, that was our curveball segment, and Antoine, I really appreciate you sitting down tonight. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate your time and your answers, and this was a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you for having me on.
So for everyone out there, really do appreciate our audience for tuning in tonight and staying up late with us as always. You can always catch this show on replay on our Facebook page, ELOSOFUMAR. We've also got a calendar of upcoming guests on there as well, so you can catch out who's going to be appearing next on ELOSOFUMARTAKES. Really excited about Take 168 next week, as we'll be welcoming back Ben Holtz of Dissident Cigars and James Brown of Oveja Negra Brands, and we'll be talking about their collaboration together and how they came up with a number of cigars, including the ELOSOFUMARTAKES #2 cigar of the year last year, the Dissident Block Lonsdale. So that will be a great conversation to kind of get behind the curtain a little bit. And we've got some great guests coming up as well, including someone we've been talking a lot about, tonight. Matt Booth will be coming on the 6th of June. So that'll be a lot of fun. You can always check out our YouTube page, ELOSOFUMAR. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, as well as if you are listening to podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts, whether that be on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Podbean, or iHeartRadio, wherever you listen to podcasts, check out ELOSOFUMARTAKES. Don't forget to download, subscribe, and review. If you already are a subscriber, I encourage you to unsubscribe, but please don't forget to resubscribe because that helps my numbers so I can continue to get great guests like Antoine this evening. So for everyone out there, I really appreciate all your likes, shares, and comments. I'm Barry Duplessis. This was our 167th take, live from the Alec Bradley Lone Star Studios of Euless, Texas. He's Antoine Reid. Guess what, everybody? See you next time.